Okay, so the key thing, I suppose, the first thing we look at when we're working with any organization that is looking to apply for grants, or if they're approaching us and saying, Tom, look, we've seen this grant is available, we want to apply for the grant, what do we do? Can you help us with the application? The key thing that we always work with all the organizations we work with is to make sure that you're aware of where you are financially in terms of what you need money for, what's your annual kind of running costs in your organization, what's your current funding strategy? Are you selling products and services for fees? Are you fundraising? Are you getting grants? Are you getting sponsors? And how are you bringing in money every year? So we look at kind of a financial plan, and that's really important when it comes to looking at grants, because sometimes people think that we'll apply for grants because they're bringing money, but most grants are for one-off projects or for new projects, and they don't really, in most cases, support the kind of operational costs. So they won't cover things like rent or staffing costs or rates or insurance or license need or anything like that. So grants normally are for one-off projects, and a lot of groups think that we can apply for grant, we bring more money in, but sometimes that grant will actually create more hassle than it's going to solve. So the key thing we always say to the organizations we work with is that even if you're a not-for-profit organization and you're a community voluntary group that are providing community services or community facilities or whatever you might be doing, you need to still think like a business, because you have to keep on bringing in money to cover the money that's going out. So like any business, it's all about cash flow. You have to make sure there's enough money coming in to the organization to cover the money going out of the organization. So that's, if you're a for-profit organization like I have, or a not-for-profit organization like you have to look at the cash flow in terms of where it's coming from, when do we need to bring money in, how often do we need to bring money in, and how much do we need to bring in. So there has to be more money coming in than going out. So that's the basis of any survival of any organization. You have to make sure there's more money coming in than going out. So what we always say to the groups is that you might be not for profit, but you're also not for loss. Okay, you need to focus on making more money than you're spending. And that's where we look at then in terms of, well, how do you do that? How do you bring that money in? So the funding really is needed for things like operational costs, so your ongoing funding. So your light and heat, your utilities, your staffing costs, your insurance costs, everything you're spending every month to keep the show on the road, to keep the services being provided. You should have a reserve policy. And the reason why you need to have a reserve policy is because we don't know what's going to happen any month from 1 month to next month. Government cutbacks, funding, dries up, fundraising dries up. COVID obviously caused major problems with people when they're fundraising. They couldn't go out and do physical fundraising. All the fundraising activity stopped. A lot of organizations who had no reserves, who had no backup funds in their account, had to close because they had no money to keep things going. So we always focus on having enough money in the account to cover kind of the rainy days when there's something where money's dried up, or things are slowing down, or there's more costs going out, or there's unforeseen costs that you have to cover, like things like boiler breaking down or a roof leaking or whatever it might be. So we always focus on having some reserve in the account. You might want to do, say, some new projects. So a lot of groups we work with would be doing what we call feasibility studies, maybe converting old buildings into community space or enterprise space, maybe looking at doing a community plan for the community or a parish plan. And that all requires funding, because you've got to pay consultants, got to pay for professional fees, and there's grants available for that sort of work. And then you have groups then that are developing projects. So they're either developing building projects, so building extensions or new buildings, or sports clubs developing facilities, or childcare groups developing their facilities, or any sort of group that are building projects. And then you've got other groups that are developing projects, like, say, maybe buying equipment or buying fixtures and fittings, or buying vehicles or something like that. So you're actually bringing in grants to purchase or to build. And that's the lot of work we focus on, is getting that sort of funds for groups in terms of larger scale funding. So the source of funding then to cover all those costs, a lot of organizations would have some fee income, so they'd be charging fees for services, so or products or facilities. So again, like a community center, maybe renting out meeting space, training room hire. You groups doing, say, Meals on Wheels, or maybe providing daycare services or after school services or childcare services. You've got groups providing transport. You've got groups there that would have maybe like charity shops and retail. You've got community cafes, community shops, cooperatives, things like that, where you're bringing in actually money from commercial activity. And then other organizations then would have membership fees. So they're bringing in fees through membership. So a sports club, for example, a GA club, soccer club, rugby club, athletics club would charge for membership, and that's bringing in fees to cover some of their running costs. You have one-off grants, which come up every year, and therefore one-off things like, say, equipment or facility upgrade, or for maybe services or programs that you want to deliver. You've got core grants. So some grants, some organizations would have core funding, and core funding is grants that will be available to allow you to run your organization each year. So examples that would be like the community services program that's managed by Pobal, which would provide some employment grants to keep a manager in place and some staff in place. Section 38 and Section 39 funding from the HSE that would support, say, example, disability organizations to provide disability services in the community. And that would be funding each year, that would be based on annual agreements with the HSE, with Pobal, and would also then obviously involve, let's say, annual work plans to be signed off on. Then you got fundraising, and that's probably the main source of funds for all not-for-profit organizations. So your fundraising, like your race nights, your golf classics, your charity events, then online fundraising, which really took off the last 2.5 years because of COVID. People went online to do fundraising, and it's actually kind of created huge opportunities for a lot of organizations because they've realized they can actually get more people to fundraise if they're online, because they're outside of their own local area. They can target a lot more people. Then you got sponsors, so companies get involved in sponsoring projects or facilities. Partners, which are longer term sponsors, so their partners would be your companies that would maybe enter maybe 3-year kind of sponsorship agreement with the group or club or whatever it might be. Donors, philanthropists who donate money to not-for-profit projects. And then you got the whole area of finance. So you got social loans from Clan-Credo, social finance from Clan-Credo, social finance from Community Finance Ireland, and then you got commercial loans from banks, so your banks and credit unions. And then finally, not a source of funding, but a source of support would be in-kind contributions, like, say, labor. So you get maybe labor provided for free. So you got volunteer tradespeople coming in doing work for you. The community getting involved in cleanups and doing work that they're not charging for. You got companies that provide materials for free, and you got companies that would provide equipment for free. So rather than you paying for labor, materials, and equipment, you might be able to get that donated or provided for free to you by companies or people within your local community. So they're kind of cocktail of funds that every organization would be relying on, some more than others. Some groups would be fairly small, but purely have this fundraising only. Other organizations would be large companies, large not-for-profit organizations that would have lots of staff, lots of volunteers, huge outgoings, but also be bringing in a lot of revenue every year as well. So what we're going to focus on this morning is grant aid. So the key thing, I suppose, really with grant aid is preparation. And what I found out from years of working with groups on preparing grants is that the groups that are more prepared and have plans in place are usually the ones that are more successful in generating as much funds as they possibly can. Some organizations are very, very good at accessing grants and accessing funding because they're very organized, they're very well prepared, they've got normally very, very solid plan in place. And the key thing is that once they get the grants, they're very good at doing the administration on the grants. So they're very good at doing the paperwork, the returns, getting the stuff back to the funding agency in terms of reports. And that means that they've got they have a very good track record with that organization in getting grants, and therefore when they apply for grants in the future, they can show that they have a track record of spending public money carefully, effectively, and efficiently. So it gives them a kind of an advantage over maybe the groups who aren't very good at that, or the groups that are just terrible at doing it. And if you're not great at the administration side of grant sports, and you're slow in getting returns back or spending the money properly, or just in the basic administration of it, that does cause problems down the line when you're looking for more funding from more other organizations. So the grant aid, really, I suppose the key things that we would look at is there's specific grants that are available every year that come up constantly every year. So like your local authority grants, like your community support fund, for example, will be every year. You've got annual grants then that will be, as I said, core funding from the likes of HSE or Pobble. The basic steps that we would focus on when looking at grants are that you research what grants are available for your project. So a lot of organizations, they just basically see grant opportunity and they apply for it, whether it's relevant to them or not. So it's like someone looking for a job and they're just basically putting their CV out to every single job that's available, whether it's kind of relevant to them or it meets their experience or not. Just keep on applying for everything. That's a waste of time on your side, and it's waste of time on the person who's assessing the grant applications. So look at the grants that are available and see if they're for the type of project that you have or they're relevant to you. If they're not relevant to you, there's no point applying for it. Now you might say, we want to do something different. We want to do a different type of a project, or we want to expand, or we want to offer another service, another program in our community. That's fine. But you need to ask the question, is that going to bring on more costs, more hassle, more work? That, okay, we will get funding for the outset in terms of getting it off the ground, but will we get funding down the line to keep this thing going? So the example I always give is that a lot of organizations out there over the years who might have got grant aid for a bus or for transport, or maybe got a bus donated to them. So I know a number of schools who got buses donated to them. I know some organizations who got buses donated to them as well, which is fantastic, and everyone was delighted. But they realized that we don't have any money for a driver, we don't have any money for diesel, we don't have any money for maintenance of the bus. And I wish to God we never got this bus because we can't afford to keep it going. So if you're applying for grant support for anything, look at the ongoing costs of keeping that project going, because sometimes it can be a curse. If you get the actual grant, you develop the project, but then you don't have funding to keep it going afterwards. It causes kind of a strain on the resources that wasn't there originally. So research what grants are available, know the deadlines and criteria. So they make it very clear as to when the deadlines are and when the closing date of the application is in what time, what day and what time. They provide, they've started providing more criteria and more information and more supports for organizations that are applying for grants. And the reason they're doing that is to stop people from applying, which kind of sounds weird, but that's the reason they're doing it. They're providing more criteria, more information, more online sessions, more webinars, more seminars on how to do the grant application. So they're going to say to people, look, really, you need to think about, are you eligible for this grant? Are you sure you want to apply for it? And it stops people from applying. So if the criteria is fairly vague, people just apply anyway. Whereas they make it very clear as to who can and who can't apply, people won't apply if they're not eligible. So the more information they can give in kind of ironically would actually reduce the amount of applications that they receive. Health consultation needs analysis done. So any project that you're looking for funding for, right? So the way I always look at this is that if I won the lotto last week, right, and I decided I was going to set up a fund to give to not-for-profit organizations, and I've all these people coming to me saying, Tom, we want to apply for this grant. That's okay, that's fine. I want to make sure that you can prove to me that your project is worth the grant that you're applying for. Okay, so you have to prove to me that, look, we need this project locally. We've identified the need for the project. We've done the analysis, we've done the research, we've done the consultation, and yes, we can prove that we need this funding. And that's what they're looking for. You can't just put in an application for a grant and say, we want to do X, Y, and Z, unless you can show to them as to why you want to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, and that's really, really important. A lot of groups don't do that. They just basically ask for money, but they don't ask for why. They don't say why they need money, or they don't convince the funder as to why they need the money. The next group comes in, they convince them, they manage to sell their project better than you do, and they get the funding instead of you. So it's very important that you show that's backed up by some sort of need and some sort of needs analysis. There's a lot of documentation normally required now with grants as well, especially with online applications. They'll look for a lot of backup technical data, like say your company details, your memos, articles of association, your annual accounts, annual reports, leases, details of deeds if you own a property. Sometimes look for policies and procedure documents, all this kind of stuff that it isn't really a problem unless you don't have them on file or you don't have them at all. Then it becomes a problem. So it's really important to have everything kind of ready to go when it's looked for. And then finally, you have to complete the application form and provide all the technical and support documentation required. The amount of organizations that don't get their applications even assessed because they don't provide all the information that's asked for is crazy. So you spend days writing an application and then you forget to submit certain documents that are required to be submitted with the application form, and then all of a sudden your application form is not even assessed. That's again is soul destroying, because you might be waiting for another 12 months for the opportunity to come around again. So it's really important that you're prepared and organized. What we tend to do is we use a very simple template like this. It's nothing, nothing really fancy. It's literally a table that we keep. So when we're working with, say, a group or an organization on an ongoing basis, and we're doing their grants for them, we'll keep an eye on what grants are available, and we'll keep an eye on when the deadlines are, and we'll consult with them then in terms of if they want to go for those grants or not. So we put in as the name of the grant. So let's say it's Community Support Fund, the source of where it's coming from, whether it be the county council or a government department, who the contact person is within the department that's dealing with the grant. What project are you going to use this grant for? So if it's Tiny Towns Group, is it for, let's say, maybe seating or planting, or maybe a biodiversity project, or training or information or whatever it might be, or signage or something, right? The application deadline, so we'll be writing here the deadline for the application. What information is required, so we make a list of what information is sought for the grant, and then we start putting an action plan together in terms of what are we going to do, who's responsible for getting that information, and then putting deadlines on that. So if we're working, say, with a GA club or a soccer club on a sports capital application, we make a list of things that needs to be done. So it might be getting the details of planning permission, getting costings, getting quotations, getting maybe the legal agreements drawn up, and we'll assign a person then within the club to do all those, so they'll be delegated with that work to do, and we give them deadlines to get that work back to us. So it means that all information that we need comes back to us well in advance of the deadline, so we don't miss a deadline. Okay, and we also input the application deadline into our diary in terms of each deadline we put into the diary, and then we start working backward from there in terms of setting deadlines to get certain elements of the work done. It sounds maybe cumbersome and a lot of work, but it will save you so much time and so much stress and hassle in terms of rushing to get an application through. Because if you leave it to the last minute, you won't get the application done in time, or you might get done in time, but it won't be good. The information sources, again, with the grants, the main ones we look at are Funding Point and Active Link. So we're registered on Funding Point, which is a website that was developed by the Wheel, wheel.ie. So Funding Point is a database of all the grants that are available, and that's updated every week. So as grants become available, it's updated on their site, so you can see what's available. Might be relevant to you, might be relevant to you. ActiveLink.ie is the other one we look up. That's updated regularly as well. And then on the government's website, or Rural Future, they have a funding calendar. So again, this is the funds that will be available and will come up. That's again, it's updated every time there's a grant available. It's updated. We also register with the departments as well. So we get on their email list. So for example, if a grant has been announced by a department, by a government department, they have to do a press release on that, and they have to publicize it. So we'll automatically get an email from the department saying that the minister announces today the launch of whatever fund it might be. So the key thing for us is that we're constantly getting updated on what grants and what funds are available, and you should be doing something similar. So literally by just registering on these websites or keeping an eye on what's happening, you'll be aware of what grants are available and when the deadlines are. And then we just basically fill that in on an app, on a template like this. Or in some cases, we've got groups who've got a wall chart, and they've got a grants wall chart, and just fill in the wall chart when the grants are available and when the deadlines are. And it's like, you're talking about literally 5 minutes per week just to keep an eye on these things. You don't have to be going through them every day, because it doesn't update every day. Probably once a week for 5 minutes, just have a look at them, see if there's anything that's relevant to you. If there is, have a decision, make a decision on a committee level. So do we go for it? Don't we go for it? Or if it's not relevant to you, just ignore it. So that's the example of the site. So this is the Active Link website. So you can see, again, it would have the title of the grant, the region, when it was listed, and then the category, right? So again, you can put in, there's regional grants and there's national grants. Again, just scrolling through this, you can see what's coming up, what's relevant. So every time a grant becomes available, it's updated on this. So if you go into the funding page, it brings you into this database here. The Wheel, then, so the Funding Point, so you click on Funding Point, it brings you into a similar database of grants like this, again with the grant deadlines and the application criteria, and everything you need to know about the grant. Okay, so this is some sample grants. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. It's just basically ones that come up pretty much every year. or that are opened every year. So Leader will be probably the main source of funds for a lot of community and voluntary organizations. Now the Leader program is currently in kind of a, I suppose, a kind of transition period where the previous program finished in 2020. And the new program hasn't started yet, but most Leader companies, local development companies that are managing Leader programs have some interim funding in place to keep them going for until the next program is coming on board. The next program will probably come in next year, hopefully will come in next year, so 2023. Typically they've been a 6-year program, so they go for 6 years. And the funding that would be available from Leader would be based on previous programs, would be feasibility studies, grants, which would be up to 90% funding to do, say, research and to do feasibility analysis on buildings and projects. And then it would be capital funding up to 250,000 euros, 75% up to 250,000 euros. There is, and has been in the previous programs, funds up to 500,000 for certain projects, but typically but 250,000 would be the max. Again, keep an eye on that. Talk to your local development companies as to when and what's happening with the new program, when it might kick in, when it might be starting. Town and village renewal, so to be Waterford County Council. So the local authorities will manage the town and village renewal schemes. That's annual. They've got grants between 20 and 100,000 euros. The outdoor recreation infrastructure scheme, again, is managed through the local authorities. That would be things like, say, walking trails, biodiversity parks, signage, some nature trails, those kinds of projects. Some outdoor infrastructure, like, say, playgrounds, kind of running tracks, things like that as well. Then your large scale funding then would be your Rural Regeneration Development Fund. And these are for projects that would be, and the Urban Regeneration Development Fund. So the rural would be for towns and villages less than 10,000 people. And then the urban one is for towns of more than 10,000 people. They're for large scale projects. So they're for projects that would be 500,000 plus. So the big kind of capital projects, that's the type of funding that would be available through these. They have to be applied through a local authority or local development company, but they can partner with a community group to advance the projects. Community Enhancement Program, again, through local authorities. The Community Support Fund through local authorities, their annual CLAR programs. So if you're in a CLAR area in Waterford, again, you might be eligible for CLAR funding. Again, it's typically managed through the local authority. The Pobble then, so Pobble manage a lot of government funding. So if you go into the Pobble website, it'll show you the type of programs that they have available. Community Foundation, again, have a kind of range of grants. Again, they update their website with the type of grants they have and what the deadlines are. Rethink Ireland is another organization that have a range of grants as well. So Pobble, Community Foundation grants, Community Foundation and Rethink normally manage funds for either government departments or for things like, say, the Coca-Cola Fund or the RTE, the Toy Show Appeal funds, or all those type of funding programs are managed through these organizations. So on their websites, they would have open applications and then closed applications. Keep an eye on what kind of supports are available and what grants are available. Again, just keep an eye on it, get on their mailing list, they'll inform you as to when the grants are becoming available. So the key thing is, I suppose, really, when you're looking at all the grants that are out there, the first thing to look at is eligibility criteria. Are you eligible to apply for this grant? And that's the most easiest thing in the world to do, because just basically they'll tell you what type of projects or organizations they'll fund, and they tell you the type of organizations that won't be funded. So, and they make it very, very clear. If it's unclear or you're not too sure, pick up the phone, ring the department that's responsible and say, look, we're a family resource centre, or we're a Tidy Towns group, or we're a GA club, or we're whatever. Are we eligible for this grant? If you are, they'll say yes. If you're not, they'll say no, you're not. And if you're not eligible, there's no point applying. And there's no point arguing them either, because some groups, they're trying to get them to change the rules or bend the rules, or give them some sort of leeway. That doesn't work at all. So if you're not eligible, you're not eligible. Look at the type of projects they've funded. So if they've funded similar projects to yours in the past, that means you know that there's precedent set, that they have funded these type of projects before, that they're likely to fund these type of projects again. Look at the aims of the grant. So what are the aims of the grant? Where is this grant coming from? What are they trying to do with the grant? So if the aims of the grant matches the aims of your organization and what you're trying to do, then you're in a good position to apply for the funding. If the aims of the grant don't don't resemble at all what you're trying to do, then you're now what we call creating a project to meet the grant, which is normally a bad idea, because it adds and creates problems afterwards, because you're adding another project on that you don't really need or don't really want, just to get funding in that's not going to go to help you in terms of keeping your running costs down, or going towards running costs. All it's going to do is add to your costs. Look at the application process. Is it an online application, or is it a hard copy application? If it's an online application, and we talk about this in the second part of the workshop this morning, if it's an online application, there's normally a registration deadline to register on the online portal. Sometimes there isn't, but normally there might be, and you might miss that deadline. So just check if it is online, is there a registration process you have to go through, and is there a deadline on that registration process? That's really important. I know the Sports Capital Funding on their Oscar portal is called, there's a deadline to actually register on the portal for the first time. If you register before, it's fine. If you haven't, you've got a deadline to register. If you miss that deadline, it means you can't apply for funding that year, which means you're missing out in 12 months. The terms and conditions of the grant, again, look at those carefully. Look at what's required at the application stage, and look what's required at the drawdown stage. Look at the amounts that can be applied for. So we've got groups we've one group at the moment that need 1.8 million in funding to do a building project that they're in their local community, and they want to apply for the new community centre support fund that's available at the moment, and they want to go apply for 300,000 euros. Now there's going to be only 16 projects nationally that will be funded at that level, so they haven't got hope basically. So they said, look, we'll apply for 100,000 euros. That's fine, but they need 1.8 million. There's no point in giving them 100,000 euros because they still need another 1.7 to do the project. So the government department are going to say, what's the point? Like there's a drop in the ocean as to what you need. So if the project is too big and the grant is too low, don't apply for it. If the grant is very, very high and you only need like a couple of thousand euros, there's no point applying either for it. So always look at the amounts that are available within the grant. If they're not relevant to you or just won't make a big difference to you, there's no point applying for it. Look at timelines. What's the deadline, obviously, in the application, but also what's the deadline in terms of getting the project completed. So a lot of projects and grants, you have to have the project completed by a certain date. If it's a building project, you've got to be very careful that you're actually able to get the work done within the time period. Okay, so it's important to, again, be planning ahead, looking ahead. What are the matching funding requirements? So typically, in every grant situation, you're going to have to provide obviously 99% of grants that you're going to be applying for, you have to provide some matching funds. That could be 10% to 20%. Okay, if you have to come up with 20% matching funds, let's say it's 100,000 euro project and you're applying for 80 and you got to show 20,000 euros is there, they will want to see that 20,000 euros in an account on your bank statement, or a loan approved from a lender saying that money has been approved, not in principle but approved in full. A lot of organizations don't say they have the matching funds, but they don't have the proof of matching funds in place. Therefore, their application is ineligible. Look at supporting documentation required. If they'll tell you exactly what they'll need. In some cases, they'll say you need to have this documentation, but you don't need to send it. You need to sign a declaration form saying that the documentation is in place in your organization. In other situations, they'll say you have to show us and prove that the documentation and submit the documentation with the application. Most of the documentation you should have anyway. The problem with most organizations is that they don't know where it is. They don't know where it's filed. Has the accountant got it? Has the solicitor got it? Has the treasurer got it? The treasurer's on holidays. How do we get in contact with the treasurer? The deadline is Friday. We're all panicking and we don't get the application in because, again, it's just bad organization. So again, have everything ready on file to send off. So why are applications turned down? Typically because the fund is oversubscribed. Like normally you'd have way more people looking for money than is available. So they might have like a €2 million budget and there might be €5 million worth of applications in. So they'll be just, everyone can't get money as such. A lot of organizations apply for projects that they're not eligible for, which is crazy, but they do. Some organizations send in the application late or they missed the deadline. But online applications, if the deadline is set for 5 p.m. on Friday after 5 p.m. the portal or the platform that the application is on closes down, so you can't actually apply at all because it's closed. Poor application. We've seen the standards application over COVID got very, very poor. A lot of the COVID applications or COVID grants that were put out by the department's kind of emergency grants were very straightforward applications. The forms were very, very straightforward, very quick, very fast turnaround time, which was fantastic. But what happened was people got used to it, just basically throwing applications together, and the standards dropped completely. We've seen some applications going in recently, and you're kind of wondering what we're thinking, like, just things that weren't completed. People putting down, like, non-applicable on questions, or referencing other questions already answered, or just leaving sections of an application form blank. Crazy stuff. Application forms not signed, and you're just kind of wondering why would you spend time, and effort putting something together and not complete it properly? Like, when you're looking for money, there is a lot of work putting grant applications together, but it's a lot less work than fundraising, going out trying to collect money, backpack, do church gate collections, do all this kind of stuff. So spend the time in getting the application right, and putting giving yourself the best chance of getting the funds. A lot of organizations don't show any consultation shown, so they haven't proven why there's a need for the project. And like a lot of groups, a committee meet, maybe 3 or 4 people, and decide, let's do this, we think it's a great idea. They don't talk to anyone about it, they don't consult with anyone, they don't see if it's actually needed, and they just drive on and do it. And that if they get funding, fair play to them, but typically it doesn't really work out. Long term, kind of falls apart. But in more recently, they just don't get the funding because they haven't shown and proven that they've done the necessary consultation. And they'll ask for that. They'll say, what consultation have you done? Who have you talked to? Who have you discussed this project with? Where is the need for the project being proven? And you might have no track record in getting grants, or you might have a poor track record. So again, the departments and the funders that are giving out grant aid, they want to make sure that your organization is capable of spending the money properly, and also reporting on that spending properly. That's really, really important. If you've got a poor record in doing that with that organization, so let's say, for example, you're applying for funding to Waterford County Council, and you've applied for funding in the past, and you've missed the deadline in terms of getting reports back, or the paperwork wasn't in order, or there was issues with the way money was spent, or whatever it might be. They're going to remember that, and they're going to say, okay, well, this group were a disaster last time to deal with. We're not ready to push the work in the money this time around. So it's about really keeping on their side, and making sure that when they see you as an organization, yeah, they're a great group. We've worked with them in the past. They're really good at spending the money. They're really good at making our job easier in terms of getting reports in time and spending it and invoicing and all kind of carry on. We like this group to work with. We'll support them again. So that's really, really important. If you're a brand new group and never applied for a grant before, okay, that means you don't have a track record. Not the end of the world. It just means that you need to kind of sell the project more and show them that you're capable of managing the project and spending the money properly. It's really, really important, because a lot of organizations nationally, they're not capable of actually doing the admin and the follow-up after the money is drawn down, because they just don't have the people in place, or they just ignore what they're being asked to do, because there's a lot of bureaucracy involved, as you know, and unfortunately that's going to get worse, and is always getting worse. But you have to do it. You have to do the paperwork. You have to do the administration on these things. Otherwise, you're going to be struggling down the line to get funding again. Support documentation is missing, or just not included, or it's not relevant, or it's incorrect. Again, no needs analysis provided. And then the other one is no matching funds. So no proof of matching funds being in place, or being provided by the organization, so therefore the application is deemed ineligible. So a lot of cases, the people assessing the applications will skim through the application. If they find that there is certain of these things not provided, they won't even look at the application. They just basically say, okay, not relevant, we're not going to even assess it. So they won't even bother going through the application. So just make sure you have everything in place, to give yourself the best chance. This is an example of an evaluation sheet that a local development company will use, say, for the LEADER program. And again, every grant that's been assessed would have some sort of a scoring system. So the funding organization needs to have to show how they came to their conclusions in terms of how they awarded one organization funding and the other organization wasn't awarded funding. Okay, they can't just decide in a meeting amongst themselves, yeah, we like that group, so we'll give them money. We don't like that group, so we won't give them money. They have to back it up with a reason. So this is the scoring sheet that they use for the leader program, and this will be standard across the country, right? So if you know what the scoring system is, and if they normally on the criteria that they'll show what the scoring system is, but if they don't, ask them and ring them and say, can you send us on a copy of your scoring system? Because if you know what they're scoring on, that means you can make sure you focus on those areas, right? So, for example, they'd ask here, is it compatible with the local development strategy? Now, if you've no idea what the local development strategy is, then you go and find it. And you say, okay, is our project compatible with it? Okay. And we need to show how it is. Is our project innovative? Have we got the experience within an organization to deliver on the project? Okay, so your organizational structure, the skills of the people involved, etc. Is it viable? Is it sustainable? So after you get the money and you build the project, let's say, or build a building or build the facilities or buy the equipment, can we keep it going afterwards? And then is it required? So again, this is a needs assessment. So to what I talked about earlier on, have you shown that this is going to actually meet the needs of the community, fill a gap within the market, within the community that's there? So again, if you know that these are the scoring system, these are the weighting that's given to it. So there's 320s there. You've got to make sure that your application focuses very, very strongly on these areas, okay? Because when they're assessing your application, they'll score you higher then because you've managed to convince them of whatever you're trying to convince them, okay? So it's really important because you're competing against other organizations. It's kind of like, it's like a match. You're out there fighting and competing against them. You have to make sure that you give yourself the best possible chance. Knowing how they're going to score the thing gives you an advantage in terms of focusing on those areas to maximize your scores in each of those areas. And again, it does take practice, does take time. But again, if you're clever around it, you can actually sell your project better than the other organization can. So the documentation that's required then, and this is something that is something that we suggest and we recommend, and we kind of, with the groups we work with, insist on that they have, okay? And it's not a huge issue or it's not a massive undertaking to have these things in place, but you need to have them in place. So I'm going to forget about this top part for a second, but what you need to have, and every organization should have. So it's not a case of, oh, we need to have it because it's grant. You're supposed to have these things anyway, okay? So your annual report. So every organization is supposed to do an annual report outlining their achievements, what they did over the last 12 months, right? And that will be your funding, your expenditure, your achievements, what you did, what you didn't do, what you set out to do, what you achieved, were you in the papers, were you in the press, what was done, and all the positive stuff. So you're showing how good an organization we are, what we did, what we achieved over the last 12 months. So if you're doing, say, providing Meals on Wheels, how many meals were provided every week, how many people were supported, how many people benefited from the project. If it's a sports club, how many kids were involved in the year, how many people signed up, what was the academy numbers like, all these things, okay? So if you don't do annual reports, you need to start doing them because they're sought with the applications. Annual accounts. So you might have a company limited by guarantee, or you might be just a constituted group. If you're company limited by guarantee, you have to have annual accounts anyway. Your accountant will have those for you. If you're just a regular constituted group, or like a Titans group or residence association, something like that, at the very minimum, you'd have an income and expenditure or treasurer's report on what money came in, what money went out. You have a constitution, so every organization, whether it be a legal entity or a non-legal entity, has to have some constitution. If you're a company limited by guarantee, you're going to have your company documents, which would be memos and articles of association. You should have copies of those. Even if they were done by a solicitor, you should have copies yourselves on file. Every application you apply for will require that you have quotations for the works. So if it's equipment or capital works or consultancy or training, whatever it might be, you have to have quotations, and they'll determine how many quotations you need to have. So typically, if it's over 5,000 euros, you need 3 quotations. If it's over 25,000 euros, you need to go to tender. So again, if there's a tender process required, that tender process has to be done before the application goes in. If you've got a building project and you require planning, again, your planning details, like your planning reference number, your planning documentation needs to be available. Again, if it's a building project, like your technical documents, like your drawings, your building plans, your floor plans, bill of quantities from a quantity surveyor, any surveys were done, all would have to be available as well and possibly provided. Proof of consultation. Again, if you've done research within your community, maybe community plan, community consultation process, again, summarize the results of that process and what came out of it. Tax clearance. Again, every organization has to be tax compliant because it is public funds, it is taxpayers' money that's coming out. They're not going to give an organization exchequer funding if that organization is not tax compliant or the contractors doing the work for that organization aren't tax compliant. So you need to have tax clearance. So they'll ask for things like your tax access number, which you should have. If you don't have, you need to have. Any policies and procedures that, well, sometimes they won't look for these to be submitted, but they'll ask you, have you got them in place? So if they do an audit or do a check on the organization, those policies and procedures should be available to review if they're sought and asked for. So they normally ask for a declaration that you're declaring that you have these policies and procedures in place. Typically, that would be things like, say, if you're working with children or working with vulnerable adults, that you have child protection policies in place, equality policies, health and safety policies, will be your main ones. Conflict of interest policies as well for boards and for committees, volunteer policies, obviously employment contracts, all that kind of stuff, which you should have in place and on file. And then finally, insurance. So if you're getting building works done or looking for equipment or extensions or refurbishment to buildings, they'll want to make sure that that building or that equipment is insured, because if they give you a grant for 50,000 euros to convert a room into a dressing room or an office or something, and that building goes up in fire and you don't have proper insurance to cover it, not only have you lost the building, they've lost their grant as well. So they'll want to make sure that their interests are insured. So again, they look for that. On the top part here, then, this is where if you're looking for large funding, they look for a business plan or a feasibility study to be accompanied with the actual application. So if you're talking about, like, say, large projects, 500,000, so like, plus kind of big capital projects, which a lot of organizations are doing. They're building extensions to buildings, or they're building new buildings, or they're upgrading facilities, whatever it might be. You have to ensure that there's a business plan or a feasibility study in place to show that we've thought about this, we've done a feasibility analysis on it, this is a viable project. Okay, so they look for that. For the larger projects, the ones that are million plus, you'd have to go into very detailed financial analysis on those projects, because they're obviously they're big money involved. But typically you don't need to show these for the smaller grants. But again, we would recommend you have some sort of strategic plan for your organization in place anyway, that you can refer back to when you're doing these applications. Okay, so every organization should have some sort of plan, and some sort of either a strategic plan or a business plan in terms of what they're going to do over the next 12 months, and how they're going to do it and what they're trying to achieve. That should be in place anyway, and you can refer back to that then when you're doing your application. Okay. The other thing that we would recommend you have is a table like this, or a template like this. And this is for any grants you receive. So when you receive a grant, what we recommend you do is you put in the name of the grant that you received, where it came from, when it was received, what the purpose of the grant was, or what was used for, the amount that was provided. Now you can also put in this additional stuff here, which is, it's fine if you want to, you don't have to. I do, because it makes it easier in tracking grants and seeing what we did before. The reason why we get groups through this is that every application that you apply for, or every grants you apply for, you have to show them what grants you received in the past. That sounds fairly straightforward. Most organizations remember they got a grant, they can't remember what the amount was, how much they got, they can't remember when they got it, they can't remember what it was for, and they can't remember who gave it to them. Okay, because there's so much things happening. And then they have to backtrack, and they're looking up their bank statements, and they're ringing people, and they're ringing the departments, ringing whoever gave them the funding, saying, look, we got a grant from you last year, how much was it again, when did we get it? If you, every time you get a grant, literally go into file, type this in, that means the work is done. You don't have to then start looking for things afterwards. It's already there in front of you. Okay, these are kind of like hints and tips that we have to speed up the process and keep you kind of more organized. And it's small things like this that really cause problems for people, because they just don't know where the information is, and they're panicking in because they're rushing to get the application in, and then sometimes leave it blank, which is obviously you can't do. So now, if you haven't received any grants in the past, that's fine. Say we haven't received any grants, non-applicable, that's fine. But if you have, you need to fill in a form, fill in a table like this on the application form. Needs analysis, again, with the needs analysis, you need to show what you're applying for, obviously, right? So you need to show them how you identify the needs. So if you say to an organization, we want to convert part of our community building into offices for remote workers, right? So people are working remotely. We want to provide them with office space so they can work from our building, work in the village, whatever. You need to show them that we've identified the need for this. And by doing that, you say, okay, you can say we're inundated with people asking us, is there any office space available locally that we can use when we're working remotely? We don't want to work from home anymore. Broadband's not good. Is there any space within your center we can use? That sort of thing, right? If you've got, say, a sports organization and they want to build additional dressing room space or put on additional dressing rooms or expand their facilities, they need to show that the reason they're doing this is because their numbers are increasing each year, their space is limited, and they're struggling to keep the numbers because they just don't have enough space. Or they might say they've been seeing an increase in the number of girls that are getting involved in the sport. They only currently have 2 dressing rooms, need to put in female dressing rooms into the clubhouse now as well, because there's more girls getting involved in the sport and they're promoting girls getting involved in the sport. So therefore they're saying this is why we need the money. You have to back up the ask with a need. What research have you done? So again, consultation process, you might have done a public survey, community survey, you might have talked to your existing clients, you might have talked to the local authority, to your local development company, and you've done a bit of research and you've done a bit of analysis on the project. What would the impact be? So this is really important when you're looking at a community and voluntary organization and you're looking at the impact of the work you do. You've got to be able to measure that. Okay, so if you're working, so we do a lot of work with disability organizations, we do a lot of work with cancer support organizations. Okay, so the impact, I say, for cancer support organizations. So we work with Kerry Cancer Support here based in Tralee, and they provide a bus to Cork every day for cancer patients who are getting cancer treatment in Cork on a daily basis. So they provide them with free bus transport from their location, from their house or from a central location to Cork every day. The impact of that, there's no financial impact on it, there's no economic impact on it. The impact is on that person's well-being. Also, the impact is on their families. So the families aren't taking a day off work to bring their mom, dad, sibling, neighbor, whoever it might be, to the cancer treatment every day. The impact in terms of the person, because they're on a bus where there's also a nurse in the bus, they're getting that support. So it's very hard to measure that impact in terms of numbers, because it might be only 5 people on a bus, right? But the impact on that person's life or their well-being is immeasurable, right? So you need to kind of figure out a way of how we measure that, okay? So it's really important that you're showing the impact, because when they're looking at giving up money, they're going to look at what they call value for money, right? And the projects that will have the greater impact are the projects that are going to get the funding, okay? And if you can show that there's an impact, not just on the person that's is getting the service or getting the facility or getting the support, but also the wider community, that's really, really important. So for example, if you're providing childcare in a community childcare facility in a town or a village, the impact is on the child, obviously, because they're getting the service, but it's also on their parents and on the wider community, so that parent can go and work, that parent can go and do further education. The child's more supported going into secondary international school, so there's benefits to national school. You've shown all these impacts rather than just the main impact, and that's really, really important in applications going forward. It always was, but it's getting more so now, because what government want to see is that their money is being spent in areas where they can demonstrate the impact. Okay, now you might kind of be cynical about that and say, well, you can show examples of where there is no impact, but they said there is, but you can say, from your point of view, it needs to be shown where your project has real impact at a local level, and that's so important, because that's one of the areas that they focus on. The other area where we focus on is displacement. So if you're asking for money to do something, and there's another organization doing the exact same thing or something similar to it locally, the question would be raised then as to why are you doing the same thing? Why are you duplicating what's already been done in a town or in a village? Okay, because with funding, they don't want to displace or cause displacement. And what that basically means is that, let's say there's an organization providing disability services in your town. Okay, and you come in and you set a project that's going to be providing disability services to the same people or to the same client group, right? They say, well, this has already been done by this other organization, and you're coming in, and all that happened here is you really want to start taking people from them, and then your parents will move their kids out of that service and implement your service, and it's going to cause problems for that service. So you've got to show that you're not duplicating work that's already been done by either private sector or community sector. Now, in most cases, and like pretty much 9 times out of 10, there's no displacement. The project is being delivered because there's no one else providing that service, and you're trying to fill that gap. But you need to show them that there's no one providing the service or the same service. What we show is that your project might actually complement an existing service provider or provide other alternatives, but not displace the existing service provider. The sustainability part is a key, and that's something you should be asking yourselves anyway, in terms of, if we develop this project that we're trying to develop, how do we sustain it? If you're not developing new projects, you need to look at how are you sustaining your services and your facilities each year. So how are you bringing money in, and can you sustain that way? Sustain that. So if you got literally, you're completely reliant on fundraising, or if you're completely reliant on grant support to keep everything going, that's not sustainable. You need to have a kind of a mix of funding sources and a mix of revenue sources to sustain a project long term, because you can't keep going back to the same well every time. It's going to run dry. So you've got to have a number of different wells to go to draw money down, and look at being creative as how you bring money in each year. And that's what they ask about sustainability. And the reason why they ask about sustainability is that they don't want to give money to a project that's not going to be sustainable, because that money that they're going to give you is going to be wasted then, because it's going to be gone. So if they give you money to do something and you can't sustain it, then that money is basically gone to them. There's no benefit in that long term. They want to give money to something that's going to be kickstarted with that money and is going to continue long term. That's where there's value in it. Okay, so you need to show them that. And then finally, how much do you need? And that's a very, very simple question, but a lot of groups have no idea. We were talking to a group there recently, about 3 weeks ago, who wants to apply against that community centre fund. And I said, how much are you looking for? And they said about €250,000. And I said, okay, what's the project? And they sent me on the project and the floor plans for the building. And I looked at the floor plans, excuse me, and I looked at the square meters of the building, and I took an average current construction cost per square meter. And the building that they presented to me was going to cost about 1.2 million. And they thought they'd do for about $250,000. And I went back to them and said, you're not going to be able to do this for $250,000. They said, why? And I showed them why. They didn't know how much needed. They just thought that, it'll cost about €250,000. And there was no thinking behind it. Now, could you imagine if they had gone ahead and actually applied for that fund? No, it wouldn't have got approved anyway, because they would have known that it was too little they were looking for. Imagine if they actually did get approved for some reason, and then they went out to tender to actually build the project, they'd be short about €1 million, which is insane. So for large capital projects, you would in most cases require a feasibility study to be completed. Okay, so that's basically where you're taking all this information and you're just putting into a study to make sure that actually the project is viable. So like we would do feasibility studies for large scale projects, and they'll spend money on like consultancy fees and surveys and design fees and planning fees and all this kind of stuff, just to make sure that the project is viable before you actually go ahead and actually apply for millions of euros. So we just completed a study literally yesterday for a group. They spent about 14 grand on doing the study between architects' fees and everything else. And they made a decision last night they're not going to go with the project, because they won't. It's not a viable project at the cost of the project. It's not viable. So no, you could say that it's at a waste of 14,000 euros. No, because they could have gone off and looked for 100,000 euros and then realized it wasn't viable, and then be like, literally the community be paying it off forever more. So that's why they give you like 90% funding to do feasibility analysis on these projects, to make sure that they are viable before you go off and spend large money on it. The other part to look for is this is something that's really important as well. And again, it's something that groups tend to ignore. I don't know why, but they do. Is organizational structures. So basically, they want to know who they're giving this money to. So you might have really good projects. You might have shown that there's needs there. We need this project in our community. we've proven there's a need for it, there's no one else doing this, people need in the community need this service or this facility or whatever it might be, and we deserve it, right? And we're entitled to it in some cases, right? But they're giving the money to a group of people, and they want to make sure that group of people are capable of doing what they're saying they're doing. So it's really important that your structure, on paper at least, right, but in reality it needs to be as well, but on paper at least, needs to show these things, right? So the experience of the people involved at the board level or at the voluntary committee level or whatever level it is, they need to be experienced. And the experience is about experiencing work you do. So for example, we would see a lot of organizations, they would have people would say business experience, finance experience, legal experience, community experience, obviously. If it's building works involved, maybe engineering experience. So they're bringing their own personal experience to the table that can actually support the project. If you've got, say, staff in place, management in place, coordinators, what's their experience, okay, as well. Again, that you can show that, we're confident we can do this because we know what we're doing. I need to show them that they need to have confidence in as well. The track record, again, if you've spent public money before, state that very clearly. Your achievements, what you've done in the past, what you managed to achieve in the past in terms of projects, in terms of delivering projects. The operational structure, so looking at your board, your committee levels. If you have committees, you should have some committees. Your staffing levels, if you've got staff, or your volunteers, okay? So again, what we would normally recommend every group to have is at least one kind of executive committee that's responsible for the finance side of things. If it's a larger organization, you might have a finance committee that's also responsible for fundraising. You might have maybe a marketing committee. You might have, specific committees in for different projects within the structure. So you take, say, a typical sports club would have maybe a coaching committee that's responsible for coaching and player development. You might have a field committee that's responsible for the facilities and the fields and pitches. And you might have a fundraising committee that's responsible for fundraising and bringing in sponsors and all that kind of stuff, right? So 3 committees are responsible for doing specific elements of the work, and you've got a board or a board of management that they're reporting to. How you manage and evaluate the projects. Now, this you might think it might be a small group, maybe doing tight towns or something, right? Which is, I think this is an awful lot of work for us to be doing. You still be doing this at some level. So you still be managing the work you do. You still have maybe a plan in place in terms of what you're going to be doing, and you still evaluate what you're doing. So, every group, doesn't matter how small it is and how many, numbers of people are involved, you might be doing it formally, but you will be managing and evaluating what you're doing. You don't just kind of decide Monday morning we're going to do X, Y, and Z and see how it goes. You're going to have some sort of plan in place to work you do. And then the big thing is, if you are looking for public funds in terms of grant aid, that you experience and manage those public funds. That's really, really important, because they want to see that you spent money before and you spent it properly. Because what the departments don't want is hassle down the line with an organization that's not capable of spending the funds right, or doesn't do the paperwork right, because then they get their knuckles wrapped as well. So when they're audited by their auditors, they'll pick a file and say, okay, we're going to pick a file from Waterford. And I say, okay, let's look at the file. Was the tendering process done correctly? Do they have the necessary number of quotations? When they drew down the money, did they submit all the paperwork properly? Did they proper invoices, receipts, bank statements, all this kind of stuff? If you're not doing this work properly, not only are you going to be and get hassled, they're going to get hassled. So they want to make sure that they're going to be working with an organization that knows what they're doing in terms of the administration of public funds. And that's really, really important. And like, I'm going to be honest with you, they're not going to say it themselves, but I know for a fact that, because I've been on the other side, I've been working in local development companies where I've been assessing grant applications. We're human beings. You want to deal with people that are going to make your life easy. You don't want to deal with people who are going to be like an absolute mess and you're chasing them for paperwork the whole time. So you want to say, okay, they were a nightmare last time to deal with. Do we really want to be dealing with them again? No, we're going to deal with a group that are going to be easy to deal with, that get their paperwork in time, it's done right, it's done correctly, because there is an amount of paperwork and bureaucracy and admin involved in these things. And they don't have to be problematic. They are problematic because a lot of organizations just don't do them properly, or they're not organized. If you're organized, it's actually fairly straightforward. And if you're organized, you will get more support from the funders. That is the fact. They won't admit it, but it is fact. Okay, so the other thing that we focus on, and it's something that to look at when you're doing your applications from now on, and you're looking at application forms, and you might have noticed this in the last while, right? before they would never, or rarely would they ask you, how does your project or this project fit with national and regional objectives, right? They rarely ask for it. Now every application, even the smaller ones, will ask for this, okay? And what this basically means is that the government and local authorities, so at the government level, you've got national policy documents, right? So your like your national development plan is your kind of your main key policy document in terms of development and supports and strategy over next number of years, right? So that's what the government come up with. That's their plan. This is what we're going to do. And then all of that plan comes another series of strategy documents and policy documents. So our rural future, the rural development policy from 2021 to 2025, that's pretty much the blueprint in terms of for our government in terms of what they're going to be doing and investing in over the next probably have now 3 more years, right? So all the funds that are going into enterprise hubs and remote working hubs and outdoor recreation space and greenways and all this kind of stuff, right? That's all stemming from this policy document. Okay, so it's basically they're saying to the country, this is our policy for the next number of years. This is what we're going to concentrate on. This is where the funding is going to go to. This is what we're going to do. Okay, at a county level, so the local authority, Waterford County Council in your case, will come up with a county development plan. I don't know where your plan is at the moment. It might be in draft form, most of them are, and it'll be for the next probably 6 years. And that's what the county council are going to focus on in terms of their policy, in terms of their development plan for the next number of years. Okay, and they'll have objectives and they'll have all these things written down on that development plan. Within the county, you might have a tourism strategy and action plan for the next 5-6 years. In each municipal district area, you have a local area plan, which is outlining what are the priorities and objectives of the local authority within those local areas over the next number of years. Okay, you've also a recreation plan, and then you've got the climate action plan, which is the blueprint in terms of how the government will meet their climate action objectives over the next number of years. Okay, the reason why I concentrate on this is because if you can show your project how it ties in with and aligns with the objectives at local level and a national level, you're going to have an advantage over the organization who might also be doing the same thing. They might also be meeting the objectives, but they haven't said it. Okay, so you stated very clearly, this is how our project is going to help you guys meet your objectives. Okay, so if they say at national level, we want to do X, Y, and Z in rural areas. Your project on the application form would state very clearly, our project will allow you to achieve X, Y, and Z in our rural area. Okay, so if we're working with a sports organization, at national level, the Sports Council and all the governing bodies of sports, right? So IRFU, GEA, FAI, etc., etc., etc. They've all got a policy about increasing participation in sport by women in sport. So girls from a young age to women as they get older, getting involved in sport. So there's a huge drop off in girls engaging in sports and activity in teenage years. Okay, so they're doing everything they possibly can to encourage more girls to get involved in sports at all levels. Okay, we know that because policy national level. If we're a sports organization, we're working with us putting a development plan together, they'll show in their plan or in their application form how they as a club are increasing participation by girls to get involved in sport. That might be providing facilities for them. It might be getting female coaches, mentors. It might be working with schools, all girls schools, and encouraging them to come in and get involved in the sport. So we're showing the funding agents or the department, this is what we're doing. Do you want it done? Help us do it, give us money to do it. That's why I'm saying it's very important to show them how your project ties in with national policy. So if you're involved in tidy towns, for the last number of years, most tidy town plans have to include a biodiversity plan. Why? Because it ties in with climate action. You want to say how we can improve communities, the environment, environmentally, how we can increase more biodiversity, how we can do more pollinator schemes, all this kind of stuff. That's what they want to do. See, nationally, if you're a local tidy towns group are doing a plan, you show them how you're going to help them achieve that. Okay, it's really, and it's not just saying it for the sake of saying it and putting it down on paper. You actually have to show them how you're going to do it. So what we do, and this might seem complicated, but it's worth doing it, right? What we do is we do something like this. We will look at a project and we would actually go through all the relevant documents, all the relevant strategies to see where does our project fit in with this, right? So this is an example of a project we worked on 2 years ago. It's for a multi-purpose recreational space outside. It's in a village outside of Tralee, about 5 kilometers from Tralee. And they were developing a full-size Astro pitch, a full-size GA pitch, 100-meter running track, and an indoor sports hall. Okay. Parts of the project, they were moving from their existing community centre and taking the sports element out of their small community centre and put into this new facility. So the project had 2 objectives. One was to provide brand new sports facilities and recreation facilities, but also was to free up space in the existing community centre to allow that to be used for something else. So what we did was we looked at the various different policy documents that were out there at the time. So the National Development Plan, the Southern Regional Assembly policies, the Kerry County Development Plan, the Kerry Local Community Economic Plan, and the Tralee Municipal District Local Area Plan. And we literally went through each plan and we identified the objectives that were relevant to the, so we looked at the outcomes first of all, what our project would do. And then we looked at each objective that was marked out on that, and we referenced it, right? So we said that the provision of sport and recreation space, which is an outcome of our project, meets the NPO 26 objective in the National Development Plan. Now, there's a bit of work involved in this, right? And most groups say, geez, there's no way I'm going to do this. There's way too much work involved in reading these things and putting them all together. All you need to do is to go to these documents, download them, search for keywords. So if you're doing an enterprise project, search for enterprise. If you're working with older people, search for older people. If you're working with youth projects, search for young people or youth projects. And you'll find the relevant sections and are relevant to your project. You don't have to read them for cover. You don't read the 300 pages of the document. Just go to what's relevant to you and your organization, okay? The great thing about this, if you do it once, you don't have to do it once, because these national policies, local policies, regional policy documents, they're normally 5 or 6 year policies. So they don't change over 5-year periods. So you're not like going back every year and scanning all these documents again to see what's relevant. These are the same, these numbers here are going to be relevant for the next number of years until the actual policies are rewritten and strategies are rewritten. So it's a matter of just doing it once. The reason why it's important to do it is because you're showing them very, very graphically how our project meets all their objectives. Okay, so in this one table that's shown in front of you here, it's very clear that, geez, this project that's been happening or is going to be happening down in outside Tralee is really hitting the nail here in terms of all our policies, what we're trying to achieve at a national level. Okay, the other project that might be in from another organization somewhere else in the country might be doing the exact same thing, but they haven't stated it. They might put in a one-liner saying that, oh yeah, our project meets is aligned to national policy and local policy, and that's it. They've ticked the box. We've actually shown them and proven it to them how it does. Okay. The reason why I concentrate on giving more information that might be even required in an application is because it's selling it to them the whole time. You're trying to put your project forward and give your project the best possible chance. Okay. Now, if it's a project that's worth, or grants is worth €2,000, would you go to that level of detail? Probably not. These are large scale capital projects. So you are going to put in a huge amount of effort into doing these things. But as I said, once they're done once, that we would have done probably 3 different applications for this project, and we just basically cut and paste this table for each one, because you have done once the same for all of them. You don't have to go back and do it all over again. You just do it once and then just use it for the same things for next project, for next grant, because the grant applications, you'll see pretty much the same information sought for every grant application. So once you do one application for that one project, it's the same information that's going to go into all the other applications for that project as well. Okay, so that's important to highlight how your project meets national policy, local policy. If you don't know where to get these documents, they're available on all the local authority documentation, and the strategies are on their website. They have to obviously put them up on the website for review. And if you want, just go onto the government department sites and download the relevant strategy documents from their websites. They're all available to download to all as PDF documents. So there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to be informed of these things. Matching funds. is the other thing then that you'd look at. So again, in terms of the matching funds, look at what the criteria states in terms of what matching funds need to be in place. Now, it's very important to read them, to read criteria properly, because in some cases, they will say that the maximum grant is 80% and you have to show 20%. But they might have on that 5% of the matching funds has to be in cash. So groups go in, say, oh, we got 20% here, we got loan approved from the credit union of 20,000 euros. There you go, there's a matching funds, but there's no cash funds. If they ask for 5% matching in cash, then 5% of that matching fund has to be in cash sitting in your bank statement. Okay. So a lot of groups, they don't read the criteria properly. They think they've ticked the box, they haven't. So look at the cash matching requirements. What some groups do and have done in the past is that they, let's say there's 20% matching funding required, which maybe say is 20,000 euros, and they don't have it in the bank account, right? They literally do kind of a whip around, and they get money. People just give money and lodge money into the account maybe 2 or 3 days beforehand, and they lodge that money in. And then once the grant application has gone in, they take the money back out again. And that was happening a lot over the years, and I've seen it firsthand. A lot of groups doing it. And there's nothing wrong with it, you know, it's nothing illegal or anything like that. But now what they look for is they look for bank statements, and they look for maybe 3 months bank statements, and they'll see that the money was lodged literally the day before. They'll know then that this money was only put in just last minute for the purpose of getting the matching fund requirements. And what they know then is that this group has no track record in fundraising, that they weren't able to raise this money. And that then is basically a red flag to them, because that shows that they're not going to be possibly able to complete the project, or if they do, that they won't have the fundraising capacity to sustain it afterwards. Okay. So what we do when we're dealing with grant applications, we talk to our groups. If they're showing matching funds in place and they have it in their bank statement, that they also put a note into as to how that money was raised. Okay, it might be reserves. They might have raised it at all. It might be sitting there and there's reserve in the account. They might have made more money last year than they needed, and I'm sitting there, it's all fine. But they need to show in a small explanation, like one paragraph, a couple of lines, whatever it might be, where the matching funds came from, how the cash was in the bank, it was in the account. Was it raised? Was it in there as reserve? Again, all you're doing is selling them that they should be confident in you that, one, you can generate reserves, or two, you're able to fundraise. Okay, just don't just put it in, take it back out, because it's so obvious when groups do that. And before, they'd only see a lot of groups before would just put in a letter from the account or from the bank stating what their balance was on that date. Now they look for 3 months bank statements to see where the money is coming from. The options then you have could be money held in the account as reserves, revenue for fundraising, balance in your current account. It could be a number of current accounts, so you could actually have maybe 3 or 4 current accounts, and you're taking bits from all of them. That's fine too. It could be a loan, so a bridging loan, because with grants you have to spend the money first and you draw the money down. So you need some sort of bridging finance. So it could be a bridging loan and a term loan. They won't just accept a letter from a bank manager, which they don't tend to do anymore anyway, saying that, you know, we have no problem giving this group a loan. They're great guys. They're fantastic. We've done them for years and years and years. They're great customers of ours. We'll give them a loan if they look for it. That's not acceptable. The loan has to be approved, has to be applied for and approved. Okay. They normally look for the term on the loan, the interest on the loan, and the monthly repayments on the loan. And they look for that to be stamped by the bank as well. In some cases, they have a template the bank has to fill out. They won't just take your word for it that you have the loan. They want proof that the loan's in place. The reason why they do that, because some groups ask me, why do they look for that proof that the loan's in place? If the loan is not in place, you won't be able to start the project. Because if you get grant approval and you didn't go off to start the works, and you need to borrow money to spend the money first, to draw the money down, to draw the grant down. And let's say you get turned down for the loan, then you go back to the department saying, look, geez, thanks so much for the grant. We really appreciate it, but we can't use it because we can't borrow money to start the works. That's why they look for everything to be in place. What government departments don't want to do is have to take money back off you. They want to make sure that your project can start the minute that the grant's been approved. Okay. They will not just take your word for it. So for example, if you need planning permission, they won't take your word for it. They want proof the planning's in place. If you have to show matching funds, they want proof of it. The days of them accepting your word is gone. They want proof because they want to make sure that this project can start without any hiccups when we give the money to them. If there's in-kind contributions, In some cases, they will allow for that. So they'll actually allow you to put in voluntary labor and actually put a kind of value on it. In other cases, they won't look for that, but you can show that, look, we're providing matching funds, but we're also providing voluntary labor. We're also providing the facility. We're also, providing existing equipment or putting our own time into it. Okay. Now you might be able to use that as matching, but it's no harm stating that anyway, that you're also investing your own time in it as well. Okay. In terms of then just in terms of the quotations they look for, they normally make it very clear on their criteria. But in terms of quotations and how many quotations they'll accept for, if you're putting in a cost, let's say on the application form, what you're looking for in terms of a cost, that has to be backed up by quotations. So typically the thresholds at EU and national level, if it's less than 5,000 euros, the project, you can get verbal quotes from suppliers. Okay, and you say, okay, we asked 3 suppliers, they came back with 3 quotations. Here's when we went with. It's between 5,000 and 25,000. You have to go through a proper quotation process. So you send out an email or write to at least 3 suppliers, okay, stating that what you want done, give them a brief, what you're looking for, and they would email them quotations back on that brief. All right, the brief has to be the exact same that goes to the three suppliers. So if I'm tendering for a training program or for consultancy work or a plan or whatever, I'll get a brief in by email saying we're looking for someone to quote on the following, and they give me a brief what the work is. That's gone out to maybe 3 or 4 other consultants, and then I email them back my quotation based on that. Okay, you have to be able to prove that they all received the email with the same brief, and you have to show that they email back the quotations to you. Okay, there has to be documentation proving that when they come looking for it, and then again you have to pick one and then advise the other 2 that they've been unsuccessful. If it's over 25,000, you got to go through a formal e-tendering process, and that means you got to put the project up on e-tenders, which is a bit more complex, a bit more, a lot more time consuming, and just a bit more hassle for the group involved. So again, but you have to go through full e-tender if it's over 25,000. So again, they'll make that very clear on the criteria. They normally would advise on that, well in advance of the application deadline to make sure that they have the right number of quotations. But this is a standard criteria for all projects anyway. If you there might be some situation that they'll allow for, they might change that slightly, but in terms of national procurement, these are guidelines in terms of quotation requirements. Okay, I was going to take a break there for a second before we move on to the actual application itself. Have you questions on that in terms of the process? So what we've been covering so far is the process in terms of researching it, getting information together, being knowledgeable in terms of what grants are out there, being knowledgeable in terms of criteria. But if any specific questions on that for me before we take a break and move on into the actual application process, application filling after the break. Any questions? If you sort of unmute yourself there, anyone?
Tom, I have one there, please.
Yeah, Mary, yeah.
Do you know the way you were on about the tax clearance cert?
Yep.
That everyone should have one? Is that only if you're drawing down funding over 10,000?
It's no harm to get it anyway. To have just a tax access number, to have it there, because they normally ask for it in the application form. So they normally ask for your if it's company, the company number, and the tax access number. So it's just handy to have. You get like your accountants you can apply for it yourselves, or your accountant can apply for it if you have an accountant. But it's just handy to have the number, put it in.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the smaller groups who might just want the 400 or 500 euro from the council every February, or the 1,000 euro from the LCD grant. Not to frighten them off.
Yeah, no, it's only a matter of getting the tax access number from revenue. There's no real application process go through. It won't cost you anything to get it. It's just anything to have. It's also like as well, you're rather than leaving things blank in the application form. If you can get it, it's just you put it in, otherwise you can explain why you don't have a tax access number.
Yeah.
And they might ask the question, they might just basically ignore it. So that'd be important. The other thing as well is that I have mentioned as well is that there's no requirement at the moment to be registered as a charity or registered with the charities regulator to apply for a lot of grants, but it's probably going to come to a point where that you might have to be registered with a chartered regulator to apply. The reason being is that the chartered regulator is kind of I suppose, kind of an audit function now, that they I suppose they're not monitor, but yeah, they do monitor, I suppose, the activity within the sector. So you have to report to them in terms of what you're doing, your finances and all that. So it's another way of the government departments and local authorities knowing that the group they're dealing with are being they're being audited or monitored by an external organization. Okay, because there has been issues over the years with charities in terms of accountability and transparency, and the regulator is kind of putting a stop to that in terms of you've all these layers now of reporting back to them. I would think it's only a matter of time before most applications will require you to be registered with the regulator before you can apply. Some, as currently now, you have to be, but I think down the line it will, because it just provides that level of security for the funders, but that's something that you think about in terms of, do we go down that road of registering with the regulator and apply for chartered status, because there's pros and cons with that as well. Obviously the biggest problem with it is that you got this lower layered bureaucracy to do in terms of reporting back to the regulator every year. The good thing about the regulator is that it does kind of discipline groups to being, or does kind of make groups be more disciplined in terms of their governance and their structures and their policies and procedures and how they operate, which is not a bad thing, because it does kind of keep you in line and keep you working more efficiently, which does help you then when you're applying for funding. It does give the organizations, the funders, kind of more confidence in you. Is there any other questions, or are you okay? Does all make sense?
Hi, Tom, can I just ask a question, please?
Yes,
I might, Mary O'Halloran, I might be on the wrong track, but if you hire professional help to progress your grant, is there an allowance for that professional help? Because I mean, that help doesn't come cheaply, as you were saying, talking about something like it a little while ago. So if you pay for somebody to to give you all the pros and cons of what you need to have done, is there a grant for that, or is that fee included in what, if you're lucky to get the grant, is that fee included in that, or how does it work?
Normally with grant applications, the cost of it, you normally put into the criteria that they won't cover the cost of actually the cost of the organization of putting the application together. Where you do find where sometimes where it's not directly relating to paying for someone to do the grant application for you, but let's say you're applying, let's say, for a feasibility study, and you're getting a feasibility study done for a project. Okay, you can put into the brief for the consultant that the work will also include the writing of a grant application for this project. Okay, so then it's covered by the feasibility grant. Now,
all right.
And again, you can make that very clear within the brief, okay, to the consultant, or you can go to the consultant after and say, by the way, we also want you to do this, and we want you to cover that within the fees. Now, most consultants will say, we didn't tender for that, so we're not going to do it for you, we're going to charge you more for that. Other consultants will do it anyway as part of it. I would recommend that you put it in such a way that on the brief you would put in for the consultant that as part of the feasibility study that the work would also include in preparation for grant support, or identifying grant supports for the project and supporting the organization and applying for those grants. You can put that in there. So that means it's covered under the feasibility grant. To answer your question directly, no, there is. You can't apply for grants to pay for someone to do your grant application, but you can kind of bury that cost. If it's a feasibility study, they can do it as part of it.
Grand. Lovely, thanks, Tom.
Yeah, in other cases, and again, I'm going to say this out loud. Shouldn't I say it out loud? You have consultants out there who will approach you and say, we will do this grant application for you on the basis that if you get the grant, we get the contract. Okay, now that's up to yourselves in terms of how you handle that and deal with it, but you also have consultants who will do that. To be honest with you, and this is me being very honest with you now, because I do this work, you don't have to pay for professionals to do this work for you. You don't at all. The reason why we do the training sessions is to show you that you can actually do it if you're organized. Most application forms are pretty much the same. When you do one right, it's the kind of blueprint for the rest of them. Okay, I think that's, you know, and if you kind of follow the kind of guidelines I'll be showing you today, you know, a lot of this you can do yourselves, because what all a consultant will do is ask you for the information, and all it is they kind of word it in right ways and they make it look nice and they just make sure it's done properly. There's no reason why you can't make sure it's done properly. You know, it's just you know, spending time being organized doing it really. Because you know what we do, like I always kind of compare it to, let's say you go baking a cake, you can bake your own cake, or you can get someone to bake the cake for you. But in the case of this, the person who's baking the cake will say, okay, you get all the ingredients, right? You bring them to us and we just mix it and bake it, but you got to do all the work anyway. All they do is charge you to put it together. And you can do that yourselves, to be honest, you know.
Yeah. But Tom, if you were doing something like a roof, you obviously can't get up on the roof yourself and do you do a survey on that. You'd have to get a professional to do that.
That'd be back to your feasibility analysis, where you're looking to get a feasibility grant to do surveys in the building. And so let's say you're doing a roof, for example, and you're doing refurbishment to a building. You would look for a feasibility study to pay for an engineer to do a survey on the roof, to give you recommendations as to what needs to be done to the roof, to give you a costing on the cost of doing the roof, and then for someone to actually help you find the funding for the roof. That would be a feasibility grant that you'd be applying for then. That would cover your engineering fees, your quantity surveyor fees, and maybe your consultant if you're bringing a consultant in with you.
Grand. Thanks, Tom. Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Tom, can I just say that we also look over the grants for people if they want.
Brilliant. Yep.
And another tip, I don't know if you're going to cover it, and I think they're doing it lately, because everything's online, you don't really get to see what's on the next page until you get so far. Yep. But always contact them if they don't have a PDF version out for you to in Word or something, just to look at it. Yep. And do it all out roughly first, and then go on your online and do it all.
Exactly. Yep.
Get your paperwork done first, rough.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, we do. I'm covering after the break, but yeah, like we always do. We do all the applications on a Word document, and we edit them on a Word document, and we cut and paste them into the actual online application. Because you have then your Word document then is a hard copy of what was in the online. The online application, because again, it's sometimes hard to edit them and on the actual online portal anyway. So it's better to do kind of as a rough document on Word first, kind of, then, you know, you can edit that and go back to it and change it and do different things with it, you know. Any other questions before we take a break? No? Okay, we take 10 minutes, is that okay?
Yep, thanks.
Yep, I'll pause the recording on, I'll restart it afterwards. Okay, so this part of the session, I'm going to look at the application forms and kind of what goes into them and what you should be aware of. So what's happening in the last while is that most grant applications now are going online, which can be seen as a good or a bad thing. So I suppose it's happening. It kind of kicked off a number of years ago, where more of the applications were either emailed in or we're actually going through online portals. But it's getting more common now that the applications are all done online, and the kind of days of sending in hard copy applications to a department or a funder is kind of gone. So there's a couple things there to supposed to be aware of on the online application. So the difference between an online application and your typical application would be that an online application can be through a dedicated portal or like an online platform, or it's an emailed application. So an emailed application is where you're saving the application form as a PDF document and emailing that application into the recipient in the department. The supporting documentation that's required, so all the information that they want you to include with the application form has to be submitted online as well and uploaded. So again, if you don't have that information, that documentation in digital format, you need to scan them or get them sent to you in digital format. So like your annual accounts, your members articles of association, your constitution, your bank statements, all that kind of stuff that you have to submit, either in digital format already, or else you have to scan them. The application forms themselves are usually more condensed, so they typically have a character count or number count to stop you from putting too much information, which in some cases is great because there's quite much information to put in anyway. But in other cases, then it actually becomes a problem because they don't give you enough space to actually to get your message across, or to get to put your application or your project forward, and give as much information you want to give. So I know with sports capital funding applications, for example, the amount of the words counted, the character count that's allowed in each section is very low. So it's very hard to actually get in, enough information as to why you need a project and what, give the background to it. So it's very kind of short in terms of detail. The location details, normally, again, you can put in an air code, and that's automatically identifies where you are on a map, on Google Maps, for example, on the application form. You need to sign it digitally. So in some cases, it's kind of like you have to actually put in digital signature. In other cases, by hitting submit, you're actually signing the application. There is strict deadlines with this, because with, say, a traditional printed application that you submit, you have to be in by, say, 5 p.m. on a Friday. You literally could drive to the department and drop it in the door by 5 o'clock. If it's an emailed application, you can email it by the deadline. In some cases, people email it after the deadline, and they're trying to see, they hope to get away with it. Sometimes they can. With an online portal, though, once the deadline is reached, the portal actually shuts down, so you can't actually access it anymore. So if you went to log into the portal after the deadline is gone, you can't access the portal anymore, so you can't actually submit the application anyway. Once the application has gone in, you can't edit it. So, once you hit submit and the application is submitted on the portal, you can't then go back and re-edit it. You can edit the application up to the deadline time. So you can go back in and out as many times as you want and make as many changes as you want before you submit it. So you save it and you go back to work on it again the following day or whatever. But once it's gone in, it's gone in. You can't change it. So the advantages of the online applications, they can be shorter, so there's less content to be included, which kind of levels the playing field slightly, because you have, I think it was Mary mentioned earlier on, in terms of, some people that would be hiring consultants to do it professionally, and they should, I would say word should, not necessarily will, they should be better at writing these than person who doesn't do it every day. But because the application forms there's less content required, there's less kind of opportunities there for someone to kind of put in lots of information and word it, really, really well, because you're limited in what you can stay and put in. They are easier to manage in terms of a process, because you're required to have all your files uploaded. It means you can have all your files in one place and ready to kind of upload. Whereas if you're kind of back in the old days of putting a file together in a binder and putting the application form in and put in supporting letters and plans and all that kind of stuff, that can be cumbersome, and you can miss something. You got to go back over and make sure it's right and it's done properly. And scattering all that documentation can be a problem. Whereas if you're putting it all in one file in one location, it's a matter of uploading it from anywhere. You're not going back into an office to find a paperwork that's buried in a filing cabinet somewhere. Teams can work on applications, so you can have a number of people working on the same application. They can have login access and work on it with you. It does level the playing field, because some cases the application forms are simplified. Some of the applications have autofill sections, so in a lot of applications you have maybe the finance section. It kind of tots up what let's say if you're putting the cost of the project is 10,000 euros, and you're breaking that maybe down to maybe 4 or 5 categories, it'll kind of add up the total for you, and then you put in the matching funds. You might put in that we're applying for 20,000. It might just automatically come up with the actual breakdown of the matching funds. So small thing, but it does speed things up. In some cases, the grant process is all through the portal. So if you look at, say, Pobbles funding, sports capital funding, all their paperwork is done through the one portal now. So your application is done on the portal. Your paperwork for the actual drawdown of the grant is on the portal as well. You can access your files on the portal, so it's all done in the one place. Which is it does help if you're going back, again next year to do another application. A lot of information you can be going back over what you put in the previous year. It does force groups to be more efficient in completing the application. So because you're limited normally what you can say on the application form, it does focus your mind in terms of focused on what's really important and not kind of writing 4 pages of waffle and the person reading the application is trying to figure out what's this all about. Like, lots of information here, but there's it's not really getting to the point in terms of the application itself. Whereas you got less words to do that, and you get more focused on the key points and get that across. The disadvantage, sometimes word count is low, so it doesn't allow you to actually put in enough information. You do require some editing skills. So some of the systems they are getting a lot better, to be honest, but some of the older portals and online applications or online PDFs were very limited in terms of editing. You couldn't put in bullet points, you couldn't put in spaces. It was I don't know how they were able to read them because it was terrible. In all cases, you have to have passwords and login. No, that's the disadvantage, because a lot of people forget their passwords and their login. So when it comes to actually doing the application and they can't access it, you might think that's a small thing when that happens. And off of that, the more people are ringing me saying, Tom, you wouldn't have a password or a login, would you, for the application? So what we tend to do is, again, we just drop an Excel spreadsheet and put in all the passwords and logins. So we just literally open up the Excel spreadsheet, we know what it is, or just use the same password and login for all of them, so you won't forget it. This is the biggest issue, and this is what's causing a lot of problems at the moment. You do need to have good broadband. If you're working an application form at home and your broadband at home is slow or is unreliable, find some place with reliable broadband to do it, because what will happen is you'll be in an application form, you'll be working away in the application, next thing your broadband goes down, or it's lagging or it's slow, it will log you out, and you might have the information saved. Very, very frustrating. What's more worrying is, let's say your deadline is Friday, 5 p.m. You've everything ready to go, happy out. It's okay, on Friday morning now, I'll send off the application. I just give one quick look over, make sure it's right, and you're really organized and you're delighted with yourself. Friday morning comes and you go to log in on your system, and the broadband at your home or your office is down, and you're like panic stations because you can't send it. So then you're driving somewhere to find someplace with broadband that you can use. Like happened to me. I'm working from home. I've got two broadband providers here. One's backup for the other one if it goes down. And last year we were submitting an application for a client, not for a client, for ourselves, for another company I'm involved with. And my broadband was down. There was a power cut. The broadband was down. I had to go off. No, we have an office in town, so I had to drive in. No, I didn't leave it so late, so I got done in time. But if I left it late, I'd be in serious trouble, So it does happen a lot. You just make sure you've got reliable broadband where you're working from. It does require some knowledge of IT. You don't need to be software developers or some IT genius to do these things, but you do need to be familiar with kind of using PCs in terms of file uploading, saving files as PDF documents, moving back and forth between applications. So it does require some basic knowledge of and competency in using computer, basically, but more on file uploading. That can cause problems for people if they don't save the files properly, or they're not just too sure how to actually access the file on the system. There is strict deadlines, which that's not really a disadvantage, because that's the same with all of them. So some applications cannot be printed. So I think Muriel mentioned that earlier, in terms of, you can't, once you've got the application submitted, you can't access it. So the problem with that is that you can't share that application in with your committee or with your board, or if you're going back to look at what you applied for last time around, you can't access that. So in some cases now they're getting better. You can actually print the application form. So it allows you to print the full application form as a PDF. You can do screenshots as you go along, but typically you don't have all the information on the screen. So what I tend to do is, as I mentioned before the break, is I would rewrite the application in full on a Word document, put in the questions, cut and paste the questions into the Word document, fill in the Word document, cut and paste that out of the Word document into the online application. It means I have a hard copied in of the application form that I can go back to if we're applying for another fund for a similar project or for the same project. It says then I have to rewrite the whole thing again, because the same information goes into all of them. It just really speeds up the process. So we would always do one generic application for the project, and then use that generic application as the basis for all the other applications. So preparation, again, have all the documentation that you need in one place. So we would create a project file. So let's say you're doing building project. So let's say building project, June 2022, and that'd be the file name. And then in that file, then you'd have all your documentation required for that application. Store the project on OneDrive or Google Drive or Dropbox or some cloud-based storage. The reason again is that, let's say you've got a person who's doing the application form in the organization, whether it be volunteer or staff member or board member or someone, and they say, look, I'll do the application for you, that's fine. They have it on their laptop is stolen, or they have it on a hard drive or USB stick, they lose it, that's the application gone. Then all the documentation, all the files that are there are gone, they're missing. Let's say that person's gone on holidays and they forget to tell you they're going on holidays and they're away and they don't have their laptop with them, you can't access their laptop. That means then you don't have access to that information. So it's like having a filing cabinet somewhere that people can access, that are allowed to access. Everyone has access to that file, that they're supposed to have your files uploaded onto a shared drive where people can get access to that. Use the same login and password details for all applications. Agree who is contact for the application. This is a really, really important thing that, again, groups don't do. And it's a simple thing, but it's one of these things people just overlook. If you're a volunteer, most of you probably volunteers for your organizations, you probably have your own personal email address. Okay, make sure that you put in on the contact the person's name. Obviously, if it's yourselves, that you're the contact for the grant application, your correct mobile number. Again, for some reason, people put in, they mistype their number, but the email, this is the most important part. If you only have if you have a personal email that you don't check regularly, that you only check every now and again, right? Make sure you pick an email that you check regularly, that you check daily, because that's what they're going to use for correspondence. So if you're not getting correspondence and some of the correspondence will be important information about the application or afterwards when you're doing the drawdown, it's important that you have an email that you use constantly. Agree who has editing and admin access. I don't like when teams are working on applications. The reason being is that people's writing ability is different, their style of writing is different, their editing skills are different. If they're answering, so say if 3 people are involved and they decide they want to split, say I'll do 2 sections, you do 2 sections, you do 2 sections, there'll be duplication there as well in terms of information provided. What we tend to do is have a number of people working on the application in terms of getting the information, which is one person is responsible for writing the application. Okay, so if I'm writing the application, I'll have members of the committee bringing me information, and I'll write it, I'll edit it, I'll go back and check with them obviously before it goes in, but I'm controlling what goes into the application. They're providing the stuff to me, I'm making sure it makes sense in the way it's worded. Highlight the deadline date. So we normally would, if you're using an online diary or just a regular diary or wall planner or whatever it might be, mark that date very, very clearly with a highlighter on your diary. Not the deadline date, the deadline that you set yourself before the deadline date. So if a deadline is Friday, this Friday, which is about 9th, 10th of June, we would set a deadline for the application to be completed by probably 2 days ago. So the 5th of June, give ourselves time. We never leave it to the last minute, last day to get an application in. If you do, unless you like stress, you will be absolutely stressed because there will be something that's missing. There will be a file that you can't find. Something will go wrong. And it would just be a mess. Have everything ready to go. We wouldn't submit it on the Monday, but we'd have everything ready by the Monday. Most cases, worst case scenario, 2 days out, we'd have everything ready, so that we can relax then and know that's ready to go in. Because you also want to give people time to review it and to come back and make any changes before it gets submitted. Again, always before you submit the application, review the guidelines again, carefully highlight any key criteria that's within. So if they're stating this project should, do the following, make sure that when you're reading the criteria, that you've answered all the questions, you've met all the criteria within the application form. A rule of thumb that we use, have been using since the first application I ever wrote was back in 1998. Basically, if the person assessing the application form has to ask more than 2 questions at the end of it about the project, that means you haven't done the application properly. The application should answer all the questions that they would have in terms of what's this group trying to do, how they're going to do it, have they the matching funds. It should also meet the key criteria that's been given to you. So if they state we want to see clearly the following, you need to show them that. So it's like when you're when you've been applying, if you apply for a job in the past and you saw the job description, you made sure that your CV had those keywords from the job description in your CV. And when you were at the interview for the job, so they said, you have to good interpersonal skills. You made sure that you told them you good interpersonal skills at the interview. You were trying to tick all the boxes for them. The same with the application form. They'll make it very clear as to what they want to see in the application. You have to give that back to them. Okay, so read it again and again and again. I would normally probably proofread it 3 times, get probably 2 external people to read it as well from the group to read it as well, make sure everyone's happy with it before it goes off. Again, a lot of time involved in that. It's time consuming. You might think is it kind of overkill. It's worth it. If you're getting thousands of euros free money, it's worth the hassle doing it. This is a sample filing system that we would use. So this would be like, say, for a community support fund, we would have the community support fund file on our laptop on a shared drive. We would then get the information from the client and we would then put it all into one file. So the annual accounts, the bank statement, we will have the guidelines for that project, for that application there as well. This is our edit document or our working document that we use to fill in the application. If there was a feasibility study included, in this case there was, the memos, articles of association, the guidelines, the quotations, tax clearance. So all the information that's relevant to the application that would be sought, we know exactly where it is. So we're doing the application form online. We just go into upload and we know where to find it and we upload it. That sounds like a simple thing. It saves you the hassle of them trying to find and search through your filing system to find different things. Or when you get an email in from a supplier for a quotation, if you get to save it, then you're going through your emails to find out when the quotation was in. That's time consuming. There's a very good chance as well you could actually upload the wrong file, which happens a lot. We've seen groups upload the wrong bank statement. We've seen them upload the wrong annual accounts for maybe, not last year's ones, but the previous year ones. We've seen them upload, for example, one recent group we worked with, the Memos and Articles Association, they changed them for the charges regulator. They uploaded the old version, not the new version. Simple things like that, just bad filing systems, really. So the portal's in. So most applications would have a portal or hub where the applications are completed. Okay. Some of these will require registration and login, and some will have a deadline to register on the system before the actual application deadline. So we'll state clearly that to register as a new user on the portal, please register by the following date. Okay, and that's where you put in your name, your organization details, your tax number, PPS number, or whatever. And then it issues you you then put in your username, which is normally your email, and a password, and that becomes your username and password. Some cases it issues you a username and password, but more often than not, you can put in your own username, your own password. We normally recommend putting your email as a username and just use the same password for everything, so you won't forget it. Okay. Just make sure though that if there is a deadline, make sure if there's a deadline to register that you meet that deadline, otherwise you lose out. So just on certain things then in terms of the application form itself. Now I'm going to go through an application form in a second with you, but these are things that these are the kind of areas that causes problems for people and causes confusion in terms of they're not too sure what to put in, right? So certain things in the application form are bog standard, like your name, your organization details, all the kind of standard stuff that you can just cut and paste and put in handily enough. There is sections in application forms that do cause problems for people, and this is based on our own experience and getting feedback from people. When we asked them what part of the application form did you struggle with, and they've come back and said, well, these are sections we struggle with. So there's one section normally in applications where about impact. So what would the impact of your project be? So, and this is where people kind of say, well, how do we actually show that? So this is an example of one that we would have used for the disability project we work on here in Tralee, a group that we worked with over a number of years. And they work with young adults with intellectual disabilities on providing supports and services to get them upskilled and ready for employment. So we would have put in like bullet points like this, right? So very, very straightforward, not an awful lot of information to go into it. So we would say young people with ID need routine and structure and any isolation from their social network, tutors and personal assistance, and has profound effects on young people. So this would be in an application we submitted during COVID, where we moved, or the organization moved all their training and their courses and classes out of their center, because obviously they had to close down because of social distancing, and they moved everything online. Okay. And our argument was that if we don't continue to provide these courses and programs for our young adults with intellectual disabilities, that is going to have huge effects on them in terms of they, you know, any break in their routine is going to cause problems. So we kind of clearly stated that. We then showed how that if we, and this is what it was, we're looking for funding to purchase technology like laptops, tablets, all that kind of stuff, so they could do Zoom and use, you know, and then online technology for the tutors to use as well. And we were saying basically that the support they would give would reduce anxiety, depression, loneliness, and fear, but also have mental and physical health benefits. Okay, but then we talked about the actual how would it impact on the individuals, but then we talked about the numbers of people. So we said up to 30 people would be involved. Okay, and then but they'd be involved directly, but also their families, their parents, siblings, carers, any service providers, any special needs assistants, employers could also engage in the program as well. So if you had, say, an employer that was employing someone part-time with an intellectual disability and they were now not working there because they couldn't work there because of social distancing, the employers could engage with the course and the program on advising us to maybe what they could be doing in their own time to support them in their employment, that sort of thing. So we were not just saying 30 people were benefiting, but there was all these other people benefiting as well. And then we showed them how we'd manage that, measure that. So we said we had a robust evaluation and performance measuring tool in place. We'd engage with the participants, get feedback from them in terms of how things are going, get feedback from tutors, how things were going. And then we would measure the numbers by looking at number of logins, how long they stayed online, how they engage with the program itself, you know, by email and through the online portal or the online technology we were using. So like, for example, this training course, we would look at the numbers of people online with yourselves. We would do a survey afterwards in terms of did the workshop benefit you in terms of your organization, et cetera, et cetera. So then we would show the numbers, so the impact in terms of the value for money, and then the impact in terms of how it actually supported you in your day-to-day work. So you're just showing them what the impact you're hoping would be of the project and how the project would benefit people, and then the numbers involved. So for example, if you're dealing with, I know there's I think some of them from MinShed on the group this morning. So MinShed, for example, we look at in terms of like the number of men that are involved and engaged with in the MinShed project, how it'll benefit their lives. So, you know, their mental health, they're meeting people, they're getting involved in projects, there's a social element to it. There might be some training involved or upskilling involved, and then they might be building or making, you know, stuff for local community groups. So there's actually a return there as well in terms of they're actually building and making things, they're actually working. They're all the kind of the non kind of quantitative impact, but then the qualitative would be the numbers of men that are involved, age profile, their backgrounds, that kind of stuff, how you measure that, you know. So that's kind of, you know, how you show impact. So again, just think about the way we break it down. What is the impact in terms of to the person? How do we gauge that? So asking them, you know, how did they benefit from it, and then the impact in terms of the numbers and people involved and how you measure that. Okay, another example would be, say, we've done a lot of work with rural transport companies over the years, and we measured the number of people that would be traveling on the bus. So how many passenger trips, not passengers, but passenger trips. So if a person went from A to B, they also went from B back to A. That was 2 trips as opposed to 1 passenger. So the number of people that were using the bus, and then we'd ask the people on the bus what difference it made to their lives. And most of it was around the social interaction. They were getting out of the house, they were able to go into the local village or the local town. They weren't isolated in their house in the middle of nowhere, no one meeting them, no one talking to them, no access to any of the services. That's the impact. So by providing the bus, you're providing transport, but you're providing a lot more benefits to people outside of that. And you have to show how you're going to measure that. In terms of the question that's asked in, will the project proceed without funding? Every application will ask this question: will the project proceed without funding? And most people will put in, no, it won't. Okay, leave it at that, right? I don't do that. And the reason I don't do that is because if you're saying that this project won't proceed without funding, what you're basically saying to the funder is that we're not capable of doing this on our own. We're not able to raise the money ourselves. And if you don't support us, we're not going to do it. Okay, they're not saying you're blackmailing them, or you're not kind of, you know, not kind of threatening them as such that if you don't help us, we're not going to do it. but you're showing them that you haven't really thought outside the box. We haven't looked at alternatives ways of doing this, right? No, you mightn't be able to do the project without funding, okay? But you don't tell them that. You can either say no in a limited capacity or yes, right? What we will normally put in is yes, it will happen, but in a limited capacity, okay? So for example, we would put in there as wording, we have demonstrated that there is an immediate identified need for the project. Without full funding, this project can only be developed on a phased basis at a greatly reduced number of people participating. The only option to proceed at the required scale without funding is to secure a social finance loan. The repayments, however, would put our existing sustainable and annual budgets at risk. What we're saying there in that paragraph is that we're going to drive on with this, but we're going to have to scale way back. We won't be able to achieve what we want to achieve and what's needed. If we have to do it at the level we want to do it, we have to borrow the money, and that will put us under pressure. Okay, now what the funding agency is looking at there is, well, okay, at least they're looking at alternative ways of doing this. They've thought about it, and they're looking at it, they're being practical about it, right? And then find, part of this will be things like, in summary, we are committed to this project and meeting the needs of our young people in our community, but with the funding and support of whatever fund, we could do so much more and have much wider impact and make a real difference in the lives of vulnerable young people. So this would be something we've done for a youth project a while back. We were saying that, look, if you give us money, we can do so much more that's needed within our community. So you're rather than saying no, right, and no explanation, nothing else, use every section of the application form to sell the whole time. You're constantly kind of driving the message home to them, okay? So if you put in yes, obviously, yes, we can do it without funding, then they say, well, fine, we're not going to give you funding. So you won't put that in there. So you're saying you're using the limited capacity argument, but you're allowing yourself then to put in more information as to why they should be funding you, okay? If you say, no, we won't do it, that's not giving them an opportunity to give you a reason as to why they should fund you. Does that make sense? You're just constantly selling when you're doing these applications. The question of displacement, again, I mentioned earlier on, if they ask you, will this project cause displacement? Well, if it is going to cause displacement, I'd question why you'd be doing it in the first place, right? So in some cases, groups don't care, they'll do it anyway. But I would normally, if I'm asked to do an application and it's obvious that the group are going to basically step on the toes of another organization or cause mayhem within the community or cause rift, I don't tend to get involved, because it's just why would you get involved in something like that? So what we normally put in then, again, in terms of wording, and these are sample wording you can use or you can tweak yourselves when I send you out the slides. So let's give you one there. So we as a voluntary board continue to engage with our community, our stakeholders and other organizations operating in the community and that are providing supports to people that avail of our services. Where possible, we collaborate with other organizations on delivery of projects and services. We also support the organization through referral systems for supports and services requested but not delivered by our centre. What we're saying there is a couple of things, and there's key words here that you'll see, right? The word collaborate is hugely important. Government departments now, their policy is to support multi-purpose facilities, multi-purpose projects where there is value across the board, right? They want to see projects where people are collaborating with each other. They want to see projects where groups are partnering. So the focus now is on projects where there's a number of partners involved and those partners will benefit from it. Okay, so if you look at sports projects, there's big focus now on multi-purpose sports facilities. So the day of, like, the GA club getting their AstroTurf pitch, the soccer club getting an Astro pitch, the community group getting an Astro pitch, that's gone. They want everyone to use the same facilities because there's more value for money in it. That's more sustainable. We really want to see projects where there's building projects. They want to see buildings where there's use of building by many groups within the community, that everyone's availing of it. Okay, so the word collaboration there is really important. You're collaborating, you're partnering with other groups on a project. So we were working on my own soccer club I'm involved with as a coach with my young lads. I'm also involved in their development committee, and we applied for a number of grants this year and loans to develop a pitch. And we were not really partnering with a local school, local disability organization and the active tire group, that they can use the facility during the day when the club's not using it. And that's just basically so they don't have their own access to their own facilities. They can't afford to rent, the high rate, their own facilities. We're providing those facilities in most cases free of charge, or we're charging a minimal fee for it. But what the government are saying are just the departments are seeing is that, okay, they're developing this project for themselves, but other people in the community are going to benefit from that project. So we'll show them that. We're not saying we're going to be competing with another facility. We're providing facilities for other organizations who don't have the money to do themselves. So you're again, you can say, the question of displacement comes up, you could say, no, we're not displacing anyone, right? And leave it at that. Or again, you can use these keywords, we're collaborating, we're partnering, we've consulted with, again, use it as a selling thing. So basically, with every grant application, right? And it's what we constantly say to our groups, is that if you're looking for money, and it's what you're looking for, it's like a business going out there trying to sell a product or sell a service to a customer, right? So I go out there, I try to sell my services to a company, so they'll pay for the services I provide. And I've got to give a pitch to them. I got to give them the reason why they should take me on and hire me to do the job, right? If you're a community voluntary organization, what you're basically doing is you're selling your project to the funding organization. You're trying to convince them to give you the money, as opposed to give it to another person, another organization that's looking for the same money for the same thing in another part of the country or another part of the county. Okay, so you're using the application form as your sales pitch, because you don't have an opportunity to stand in front of them and give them a video presentation or give them a face-to-face presentation, or to meet them and talk to them and give the reasons as to why they should get involved. Because if you could, you'd easily sell it. Because we could bring people down, funders down, to look at the projects we're involved with and see the benefit of those projects in real life, and see the smiles in kids' faces that are playing sports on a Saturday morning because they have a pitch to play on, or see the person smiling on a bus because they've, for the first time in a week, they're allowed to get out of the house because they've somewhere to go. That's what you can show them, but you can't show them that on an application form. So you got to put that into words, okay? So with any sales pitch, you need to understand the person you're pitching to. So if you know what they're looking for, because we told you in the criteria, if you know what their focus of the grant is and what their focus of the fund is and what they're trying to achieve themselves as a government or as a department or as a local authority or as a local development company or whoever is giving the money, what are they trying to achieve? If you know that, you can then tell them that you're helping them achieve that, okay? So if they say we want to see more young people getting involved in activity, we're providing a playground to help young people get involved in activity. If they want to see opportunities for people to work remotely in rural areas, we're helping them because we're building those spaces for them to work remotely in a rural area. You just help us, give us the money to do it for you, and we'll help you achieve your objective. If the government are trying to achieve climate action objectives and reduce carbon emissions by whatever year it is, we're retrofitting our community hall with insulation, with LED lights, we put up solar panels. We're actually helping you achieve your targets. Give us the money to do it. So in other words, you know what they're looking for, sell it back to them in your application form. Make it very clear that, yeah, this group are doing exactly what we want to do. They're helping us achieve our aims. We'll give them money to do it. What's relevant to them? So if it's not relevant to them, they will be literally, it's not a machine that's assessing application form, it's a human being. So if it's not relevant to them in terms of they don't understand what you're doing, or they don't never experienced what you're doing, you've got to spell it out for them. So I'll give an example of that. I worked in Northside Partnership in Dublin for a number of years. Northside Partnership covered areas like Darndale, Belcamp, Coolock, Kilbarrack, areas that were huge social problems, a lot of disadvantage, huge levels of unemployment back in the mid late 90s, a lot of problems. And you had situations where when you applied for grants, you had civil servants and people working in departments who were coming from, in most cases, and being probably generic here, maybe kind of generalizing slightly, but in most experiences, coming from affluent backgrounds, from good upbringing, never experienced disadvantage, never experienced social isolation, never experienced anything like that, right? In most cases. And they weren't going to understand the reality of it. And you couldn't bring them into these estates to show them because it wasn't part of the process. So you had to explain to an application form. So like back years ago, we would have done things like, if we were applying for, say, facilities for young people in estates, housing estates, we would take a picture of, like, say, a basketball court where there was syringes and broken glass and basketball nets falling down and kids playing in the street in the wet because there was no place to play. And we showed them these images literally on the application form, and then we showed maybe an artist's impression of a proper sports facility with proper fencing and proper nets and whatever it might be, and say this is what they currently have and this is what they could have, right? So really spelling it out for them. Now, because of online applications, you can't show them that anymore. You've got to put in words. So you're trying to explain in words and paint a picture in words what you're trying to do. Okay. So, and sometimes that can be, you need to kind of be emotional about it. So you need to kind of do maybe a case study, or maybe, you know, give an example of that. So if we're say writing an application for the disability organization I worked with, or have worked with, and they were trying to provide better services and facilities for and supports for young adults with intellectual disability, we were showing that if a young person that's got an intellectual disability leaves school, their options at the moment are very limited in terms of what they can do in terms of progression. And the key thing what we found was that a lot of the girls and lads that were coming out of school were never asked what they actually wanted to do. They were told you have to go to the service provider because that's the only service provider for you. And we actually explained that in an application form one time to HSC when we're looking for funding off them. And we said, could you imagine your child being told this is where you got to go to in terms of college? You no choice, you got to go here, here, or here. And they no say in it. How would you feel? And we actually put those words into the application form, and it drove it home to the people who go, Jesus, we actually never realized it. But this is the reality for these young lads when they can leave, or young girls when they leave school. This is the reality for them. We want to change that. That's all we put in terms of the application. That's how we summed up what we were trying to do. And it made sense. Now we also give obviously the background information to it and why we're doing it, how we're going to do it, and all that kind of stuff. But that one paragraph was what drove it home to them in terms of understanding what we were trying to achieve. Okay, you got to do that. So the next question is, like, you know, are the features of your project, is it meeting their criteria, meeting their aims? Okay, it needs to be. You need to be explaining how it is, and even we will put in an application form, you know, stated very clearly that this project meets the criteria, and we'd actually show the criteria again in the application form. So we'd actually cut the criteria out of the application guidelines, put into the application form, and literally tick mark, like put a tick mark next to it, how your project actually meets it. Okay, so we actually spell it out from really. Does your project represent value for money? This is a loaded question, and it drives people insane, because if you look at what's happening nationally at the moment in terms of everything, in terms of spending, the word value for money, or the term value for money, is a joke when it comes to most things being done on a national level, because it's insane what some of the stuff they do and some of the money is spent on ridiculous things, and then where the money is supposed to be spent is not spent. You know, I'm not going to get on my soapbox about this, but it is scandalous in some cases where money is not provided where it should be provided, and it's provided in areas where it's not needed at all, to the tune of millions of euros. So when you talk about value for money, sometimes you got to bite your lip and kind of be, you know, say, well, they've a nerve talking about value for money, but we have to give back to them. Value for money, the key thing with value for money is it's about numbers. So they're all about numbers. And I say departments are all about numbers. So how many people will benefit from this? More often than not, they're focused on the quantity rather than quality, which I don't agree with, but that's kind of what they look at. So it's about numbers. So we always show in terms of how many people would benefit from this directly and indirectly. Okay. We'd also show the value for money in terms of the savings and cost savings to the exchequer. So for example, let's say you're providing counselling services, Meals on Wheels, transport services. So again, go back to the rural transport as an example. We showed, when we did an evaluation of a rural transport project down in Cork years ago, we interviewed 4 people that were getting on a bus every week to go into daycare for their lunch. They'd be a doctor there, public health nurse, and talk to them, they'd play cards, they'd have a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, have a chat, right? Once a week, for maybe from 10 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. And we interviewed 4 of these, 2 were bachelors and 2 were widowers that were living alone in farmhouses in rural areas. And 3 of the 4 told us that before the rural transport was provided, they would have spent probably at least a week, probably once a month, or not once a month, once every 2 months in hospital for depression, and for just they needed help. Once the transport was provided, most of them hadn't back in for treatment, or weren't back in hospital at all, right? And we did it scientifically. We calculated the cost of having a person in hospital for a number, say a week, in terms of per night, how much it would cost the state in terms of the health system, in terms of costs. And it was costing thousands. as opposed to providing this 1 day a week transport service for this person. So we show them, if you provide this service, it's going to cost you X amount, but it's going to save you multiples of that in other areas. Same thing if we're looking for funding, let's say for enterprise facilities, which is a lot of that at the moment across the country in terms of remote working space, co-working space, office space. So we're working with projects at the moment, which is costing this couple of million euros to build this thing. But we're showing them that there's potential there for that building to create 100 jobs in that town over, you know, the period of maybe 3 to 4 years. And we've taken, say, if the salaries that are going to be paid to those people in that building over the next 4 to 5 years, let's say it's 40,000 per person per year, the money come back to the exchequer in terms of payroll taxes, VAT returns, and then the spending on that money in the local area, in the local town, is worth multiples of the initial investment that the government are going to put into it. So the money coming back in terms of exchequer funding to the exchequer is more than what they're putting into it. So for example, if they're giving you €1 million of a project to build a centre in your village or your town, straight away 13.5% is going back to them in VAT from the construction. Straight away. The minute you spend that money, it's going straight back to them as VAT. Okay. If that creates jobs, those jobs, there's going to be taxes paid on those jobs, payroll taxes, that's going back to them. They're going to spend that money locally, it's going to create more jobs locally, that goes back to them. So the government will invest in projects where they can see a return long-term back to the government. So then invest in roads, for example, millions and billions in roads. Is there return on investment? But there will be, because the roads will lead to more infrastructure being developed, more construction, more jobs in those areas, which create money back in terms of taxes to the state anyway. So in your case, what you're showing is that it's, you know, save them money, or it's going to represent value for money, because the amount of people benefiting from this investment is per head is more if they were doing it just individually themselves. So you're looking at in terms of how your project is value for money. It's hard in some cases to do it, absolutely very hard to, because you mightn't have any economic impact to what you're doing, and it might be difficult to see how it's valued there, but you need to show how it's value for money from their perspective. Is the impact easily demonstrated? Again, back to the impact. What's the benefit of this project? How are you going to, you know, what's the impact and how are you going to benefit from it? So in our case, with the disability organization that we worked with, the impact was a number of people that got upskilled, further training, went on to further education, went on to paid part-time employment. Not work experience, because that was, you know, we didn't calculate work experience as a benefit, because if it's free work experience, okay, it is good for them, but it's not paid work experience. We want to get people in paid employment. So we said, okay, by the end of year 1, we'll have X amount of people in paid employment. In year 2, Y amount of people in paid employment, and then the benefits to them and impact to them in their lives in terms of independence, in terms of their confidence, everything else. And then finally, do they trust you, right? Which is the key thing, because you're asking them for money, so they need to be able to trust you. So that goes back to you selling your experience, your organizational skills, and your organizational structure. So if you're only putting in that we've got a board of management, we've got a coordinator, and that's it, that's all the information I'm going to give them, why would I trust you then? Because you're not giving me any reasons to trust you. Whereas you say we've got a dedicated board, voluntary board with years of experience in the following areas. We've got external people advising us on their free time, and they're volunteering their support, and they're at the end of a phone call if we need advice on something. We have a company accountant, we have a company solicitor, we get support from the PPN, we get support from the local development company, we constantly meet with the local authority. That's giving you them confidence that you're well structured and organized. Okay, you can say we've got policies and procedures in place, we're up to date with our governance, we're up to date with our accounts, all these things. Okay, they're all words, but clearly state them. The other organization might have the exact same thing, but they forgot to state them. Okay, just give them the reasons why they should trust you more than the other organization. Okay, have you questions on that before we move on to the application form? No? None? Okay, perfect. Okay, so this application form I'm just going to show you and go through which briefly it's the new fund. It's the not new now, but it's just came up this year for the first time. It's basically Community Centres Investment Fund, which the deadline is July the 14th now is the deadline. They've extended the deadline out to the 14th of July. So there's roughly about a month to get this in. This application form is, or this fund, sorry, everyone was getting really excited about this a few months ago when it was announced, because they thought, great, we have money now for community centres. So the first thing I did when I went onto it was looked at the criteria, and the criteria was a bit disheartening to say the least, because sorry, going back to the fund up here again. So there's 3 categories of funds for this. Okay, so there's category 1, 2, and 3. Category 1 funding is up to 25,000 euros. Category 2 is up to 100,000 euros, and category 3 is up to 300,000 euros. And when people heard the word 300,000, the amount of 300,000 euros, they were all very excited, all very happy, because they said this will solve all our problems. This will help us develop our centre, help us re-roof the place, help us insulate the place, and do all these things. On the criteria and on the guidelines, they're only going to fund 16 projects nationally under category 3. Okay, which is not a lot at all, right? So that pretty much rules out an awful lot of projects. Under category 2, which is 100,000 euros, it's 31 applications, 31 applications nationally they'll fund at 100,000 euros. Okay, I've been asked to do 6 applications alone from North Kerry, not Kerry County, just from North Kerry alone, for 100,001. Okay, so the chance of groups getting funding under 100,000 are very, very slim. And then under 25,000, I think it's 400 and odd number of projects nationally they'll fund at the 25,000 level. Okay, so the one thing with this community centre fund application is that you have to be operating as a centre. So it won't be for new centres. It's really going to be focused on centres that need to do kind of immediate upgrades in terms of to their building, whether it be insulation, maybe small extension, internal fit out, layout, equipment for the centre, upgrading lights, things like that. So that's kind of the focus really on it. Okay, but it's not the answer to all the problems that we thought it might be, because there are going to be a limited number of projects. So you can see here straight away on the application form, it's got a checklist. Okay, so the governing documents. So this is your constitution or your memos and articles of association that you should have. So if you have, you should have them. Every group should have at least a basic constitution. Every limited company, by guarantee, that's registered will have company documents. If you don't have them on file, get them on file. Your latest financial statements from your accountant, if you have an accountant, or your income and expenditure statement or treasurer's report if you're just constituted group. Okay, so your latest financial accounts from your accountant might be our partly 2021 accounts at this stage. Okay, but we're 6 months into 2022. So what we normally would do there is we would show 2021 accounts if they're available from your accountant, and then show an income and expenditure for the first 6 months of this year, just to give them more information again. Your project details and the costs associated with details. So if you're saying we're re-roofing the building and we've got 3 quotations in for it, or we've gone to tender on it and we've got the following tenders back. So again, that has to be done. So don't leave it to last minute, because that will take time to get those quotations back. On that point as well, you might struggle to get quotations in the current climate. A lot of builders, plumbers, tradespeople aren't quoting because the prices of everything are fluctuating so much that they're not willing to commit to a quotation that for works that you might be doing in a couple of months' time. So for example, if I'm a builder and you're asking me to quote for a piece of work for a grant application, this application was in July 14th. They might approve it maybe in September, and you get the go ahead maybe in September. That means I'm not starting work until October. Guaranteed the prices will have gone up in terms of material prices between now and then. Okay, so what most builders are doing now and tradespeople are doing is they're putting in, or anything that's revolving around equipment or materials, they're putting in on quotation that this price is based on current prices, but the price is subject to increases if the cost of materials increase. In other cases, there, before we might get the quotes valid for 60 days. We're dealing with one company at the moment. Their quotes are valid for 7 days. So they're only giving a 7-day validation on the quotes because prices are going up and down so much, or going up so much. So you might find it hard to actually get builders quote. If they do, they'll probably have a contingency in there of a percentage, or they put in on the bottom of the quotation subject to changes. So it's not a fixed price contract they're going to give you. That's creating problems for people because you're applying for grant. Let's say if they say it's going to cost 30,000 euros, and you're applying for grant based on 30,000 euros. In say 3 months' time, when you're going to do the works, let's say it's going to cost 40,000, but you only applied for grant for 30. Okay, it's causing problems across the board for existing projects that were granted previously, or for grants that have been announced now. We just got a word this morning on the grant we applied for the other company, for upgrading heating systems that we want to do in our offices and LED lights. And we contacted my business partner contacted the electrician and said, we got to go ahead with the grant. He said, that's fantastic, but the price has gone up since we gave you a quote 2 months ago. And we're going, so we know it's kind of costing maybe €2,500 more than we originally planned for. Anyway, so just be careful with that when you are looking for quotations. Don't be surprised if they're not going to give you a quote. Okay, so don't leave it to last minute, because you will be chasing quotes. Evidence of ownership. So if you own the building, you'll have deeds, or you'll have evidence that. Now, even like probably a solicitor's letter saying this, they are the owners of the building. Here's the folio number. If you're leasing the building, you need to have a long-term lease on the building. Okay, so that depends on the category funding. So for the larger category, you have to have a long-term lease. So let's say you only got a lease, year-to-year lease in the building, that won't do. You need to have a long-term lease on the building. And that, you know, if you don't have that now, chance of getting that lease sorted by July 14th is unless you've got a very good solicitor, and the property owner solicitor is fast as well, you won't have it in time. So again, these things you should be doing well in advance of the applications. So you verify your organization details. So again, here you ask basically put in your organization details on the portal, right? So you register online, your details will already be online, and you've so you hit save and continue, and moves you to the next section, right? So this stuff you would have done already when you registered. So you hit save and continue, brings you on to the next section, and it's where you put in your organization background. So again, you've got 2,000 characters to type in about what facilities you currently provide, right? This might sound kind of obvious, but you need to make sure that you're putting in here information about the facilities that's relevant to what you're applying for. Okay, so we were asked to do an application recently for this project, for this grant with a group. Okay, and what they were putting in for was they were putting in additional space in their building for meeting rooms and for some, I can't remember what it was. But when they were typing out what they already currently have, they were showing that they already had what they were looking for. So they were putting in, they had, you know, meeting room space and everything else. So it didn't really make sense that they were, if you're reading the application and reading what they were looking to, you know, when I was asking what they were trying to do, I said, but you already have this, why are you doing something else? And I said, well, we're only trying to draw down the funds really we're trying to do some other bit of work within the building, but we want to state what we're doing. I said, well, you're going to catch yourself out within the application form, because you're stating what you already have, and then you're looking for the same thing again. So what we ended up doing with them was we put in a list of what they already have in terms of facilities, and then we showed them how they were upgrading those facilities, so they could reference back to this section here. Okay, so some groups then that we would have seen would put in, we have a community center, and we provide facilities for young people, old people, and the wider community, and that's it, full stop, nothing else, right? That's not enough information. You need to get more information in terms of what you're currently providing. How many members do you currently have? So if you're a visitor, how many people are using the building? So some people don't have membership, so they say, well, we can't put in 0, we have no members. But people using the building, do you put in, let's say, or we've got the local school use it once a week, and there's like the national school, there's 100 kids in the school, and they use it once a week for whatever, right? But that's once a week, every week for the whole term. So we would put in that 100 kids use this every week. That's basically in terms of number of users, people coming through the door. You multiply that by 100 by, let's say, 30 weeks of the year, whatever it is. So when we're working with, say, community gym, they might have a gym member that comes in every day. That's a user every day. So that one person is 5 users a week is the way we would calculate it. So you're kind of manipulating the number slightly here, showing more people using the facility. So do you remember in the early part of the session this morning, I said about having details of the previous grants? This is why you need to have your table, because you got to put in here the grant you got, the year you got it, the name of the program, the grant, who funded it and amount awarded. If you can go back to your template and say, okay, well now I have all that information documented, it's a matter of just cutting and pasting it into the actual, into the application form. Your organization documents, this is where you click on your documentation. So you click on upload or add document, and you go to your file where you add your documentation. So back to what I mentioned earlier, having all your files in one location speeds up this process greatly, because you're just basically going back to your file, uploading the document, as opposed to trying to find out who's got the memos and Articles of Association. Is it the solicitor? Is it the accountant? Do we have it in-house? You're not going to get that document off anyone fast if you're looking for it fast. So make sure you have all that stuff in place. Have you submitted your organization's latest signed annual financial statements to Pobal? So this is for organizations that are already registered with Pobal. So if you're not registered with Pobal already, it's not applicable to you. And then you have to upload your financial statements again, add your document, go back to your file, and add your file and your file in there. Make sure before you submit your document and add your document, make sure that it's the correct one. So check it first, okay? Don't just basically go into the file, upload it, make sure you open the file to make sure it's the correct one. That happens an awful lot where people upload the wrong documents. Hit save and continue. Governance control. So this is where now they basically want to see, can we trust you, right, as an organization? Okay. So often does a committee or board meet? Okay. What I'm going to say to you here is really important. And I'm not presuming that I'm presuming that you're all operating effectively and governing properly and meeting regularly and all this kind of stuff, right? But it is really important, if you're not doing that, that you got regular meetings of your board or committees. What is really important as well for yourselves, you should be doing all along, but if you haven't been doing along, but definitely going forward, is you're taking proper minutes of meetings at every board meeting, committee meeting. What you'll find is that when you're dealing with grant organizational funders, and if they're doing an inspection or audit on your project, right, everything you do has to be agreed on by a board, and everything you do has to be minuted at board meetings. So if you made a decision that we're going to go ahead and re-roof the building, it should have been done at a board meeting where it was agreed to do it and when it be done and roughly what it would cost and how we go about doing it. And that's clearly stated in the minutes, okay? So you can then say that we made a decision at the board on the 15th of May that we were going to do this, and it was minuted at a board meeting. And at every board meeting, we would have a financial review and look at where we are financially and look at our budgets and our spending, and that would be signed off on, okay? What they want to see is that everything's being made at board decision level. So it's being made by a board, not by an individual. That's the first key thing, that there's no individual making decisions on behalf of the organization, doing their own thing, right? Going off making decisions on their own, agreeing and spending on their own, dealing with contractors on their own has to be done at committee level, okay? Very important, where there's transparency and accountability. More and more now they're starting to ask questions like this to prove that that's there. Now you can lie, of course, and say, oh yeah, we meet weekly. Then if it's checked and they ask for, okay, but show us your minutes and meetings, you don't have any, there are going to be problems. So they ask you these questions because they want to make sure that you're doing everything in a proper way. So like very, very rarely would a board meet weekly, but you might have committees meeting weekly, or you might say we meet monthly or as often as required. Anything beyond bi-monthly is I wouldn't trust any organization that's only meeting quarterly, because there's no accountability there, there's no governance there, there's no oversight there. So at least bi-monthly, but we would recommend monthly on everything. And the committee would meet, committees would meet then as needs be throughout the month. Again, provide details on how the committee board proposed to manage the project, including any risks. So this is where they're asking you, have you looked at the risk management in terms of the project itself? So how you manage that risk. So the biggest risk at the moment with any building project, as I said earlier on, is costs, how you manage costs. Okay. So what I would put in there is that we have a project committee that is looking primarily on this project. So I'll give an example of one, the club that I'm involved with at the moment. We have a team there that is responsible for the project, and the other committees have nothing to do with it whatsoever. On that team, we deliberately sought people that had specific skills and experience. So we've got a solicitor on there who can deal with all the legals. We have a quantist or an architect on there who can deal with all the design elements of it and the engineering elements of it and the building element of it. I'm on there on the finance side of it, and there's an accountant there on the finance side. Okay, so there's 4 of us key people. We meet once every 2 weeks on a Zoom call for 25 minutes or half an hour to see where we are with the project. Okay, we're now at the point where we've engaged with contractors who are going to start work probably at the end of this month. And what we're doing is we're managing that process. Then, so we've an architect on board to make sure the work's done correctly, and we've an accountant is looking after the budget to make sure the budget's on time, and we're managing risks as we go along. Okay, so we're managing it. So we're not saying that the coordinator is managing it or the board is managing it. We have a specific team that are tasked with managing this project. So if you're doing a community center project like this, where it's building involved, so we got 4 people on a project team that are responsible for the project. They report back to the board, they monitor it, and they're working alongside the contractor. We've engaged, maybe you might have an outside architect sign off and an engineer sign off on it, and you're engaging with them as well. You're minimizing risk by keeping on top of the project on a week-to-week basis, managing the budgets, keeping an eye on the budget, keeping an eye on what works are done. Okay, so again, you're just showing them that we're not just leaving it to chance. We have a dedicated team that are doing this. The project then. So again, what project you're applying for? So you pick that. So category 1, 2, or 3. Now again, it's important to look at the criteria. So category 1, you don't have to show any matching funds at all, which is great. Category 2, you have to show 5% matching funds, and category 3, you got to show 5% matching funds. Okay, so if you're doing category 1 project up to 25,000 euros, between 10 and 25,000, minimum works to the building, you don't need to show any matching funds. Okay. Put a title on a project, so that might be, say, roof repair, energy upgrades to the building, whatever it is. That's not a huge issue. Summary of the project. So what the project involved. So if let's say you're doing energy upgrades, you might say we did an energy audit on the building. It highlights a number of energy inefficiencies in the building, and to rectify that, we're doing the following. So we're putting in increasing insulation, we're replacing all the lights with LED lights, we're putting in water harvesting system, we're putting in solar panels, we're putting in more insulation in the roof, we're looking at changing the heating system, whatever you're doing, right? So just list bullet points what you're doing. It doesn't have to be big long essay what you're doing, just bullet point it. When will the project start? This is important as well because this will kind of go back to your management of the project. So typically, if they don't ask for a date, and doing this one, you have to put in a date on the calendar, we would typically put in that the project will start within 1 month of the project being approved. Okay. If they look for a specific date, be realistic about it. They're not going to, if the deadline finishes July 14th, the chance of them approving this and being ready to go by the 1st of September would be slim. So I would put in there as a nominal date, probably mid-September. Okay. You could also ring them and say, when will be approving the application? When will we know if we're successful or not? But let's say you're successful. Let's say they announce this in the end of July. You're not going to get any tradesperson to do any work in August, right? Because they'll be either on holidays or they'll be too busy. So by the time you get a tradesperson on board to do any building works, you're probably talking about at least mid-September. So I would put in probably 15th September there as a date. They're not going to stick you to this. They just want to kind of know, is your project shovel ready, basically. They want to know, is your project going to start pretty much kind of sooner rather than later. When will your project end? Again, there is on the criteria, there's dates. I think it has to be done within 12 months of the day of the work commencing. Normally it depends on the work. So if it's only an energy upgrade, and doesn't require major works, you'll be looking putting maybe 3 months. If it's a building work, you put in a bit longer. If it's only basic works to maybe like equipment or something like that, put in maybe a month, 2 months. Okay. But give yourself enough time. Again, they won't stick it to you. It's basically they want to know roughly when's the money going to go out and when will we see the drawdowns of the grant date. They just want that for their own purposes more so than kind of saying what you said back in July 14th that it was going to start in September, it didn't, and it's going to end in July the following year, it didn't. That's not what it's all about. They're trying to gauge when projects will start and finish themselves. But be realistic about it too. The results. So again, describe any upgrades and improvements your project plans to make. So again, this is kind of similar to the summary question up here, right? That can get kind of annoying where they ask the same question in 2 different ways. Doesn't matter. Don't do what a lot of people do and say, please refer to section whatever it is, or see above or something, right? Don't do that. Use the opportunity to sell it again, use the opportunity to use the characters to put in more information to sell the project to them, okay? Explaining why you need to do upgrades. So we were doing work with a group who are improving their energy efficiency in terms of insulation and heating system because the building's too cold, and the older people in the community who were using it for their active retirement meetings and for things like bingo and say different recreation activities stopped using it because the building was too cold. So now there's no place for them to go. The building's losing out on that service. They need to upgrade the facilities. So just explain that as to why you're doing it. How will the project benefit the community? Will it offer more services? Does it allow you to engage more people or groups? So the example I just gave you there with the improving efficiency means that older people in the community now will start using it again. Because we've upgraded the facilities, we can maybe have people working out there. We can offer to maybe sub a youth group out of it. Whatever you want to do with the building, show how it's going to impact in the community, how it's going to provide you with more services. Okay. How will the project encourage? So this is the one that's catching up people as well. So how is your project going to encourage disadvantaged and marginalized groups to use the proposed centre? Okay. What most people are putting in here is a standard one. And the standard one will be disability access. So most older buildings aren't fully accessible. So ones we're seeing here is that they're extending or expanding doorways, they're putting in ramps, they're installing disability access disabled toilets. They might be putting in things like, say, disability car parking spaces in their car park, things like that. Where they're looking at then in terms of, let's say, other marginalized groups, how are they being encouraged to use the centre, okay? So where some groups will be working, maybe, let's say, youth groups that are working with marginalized young people from the traveling community or wherever, or new communities that are coming into the area, how are they supporting them through their centre? So where they might say, we're making our centre available to the local youth group who are working with marginalised groups. So you might be doing the work directly, but you're providing facilities for the groups that are working with those marginalised groups. The majority of people are putting in that they're making the buildings accessible. Okay. But you know, some people are saying, what do we put in here? What, we're not doing anything. No matter what you're doing, you're going to be doing something that's going to potentially support disadvantaged and marginalised groups in your community. In some cases, and being brutally honest, centres don't want to. And then you'll be questioning why are you looking for public funds to do the works then if you're going to discriminate against certain people using your building. So it's kind of an ethical question then that I'll be asking with them, I don't like when groups put in things for the sake of it, answering the question for the sake of it. Just tick a box, because I think that if you are providing space for people, you need to be providing space for everyone. If you're looking for money to do it, I think you should be doing that anyway, Program criteria then. So again, how do you identify the needs? So it's back to what we mentioned earlier on. How is this need being identified? So if it's upgrades to buildings, typically it's been an energy audit being done that's triggered this, or you've got feedback from your community, people using the facility saying that, look, we'd like to use this facility, but it's not accessible, or we need more space, or it'd be great if you had additional space. It'd be great if we had a kitchen in our centre where we could do meals for events. I know one community group centre that do meals for funerals and christenings and christenings, communions and confirmations, because there is no pub or hotel in the village, and when people come out of the church, they have no place to go to, so they provide tea and sandwiches and stuff like that for different gatherings, because they've got a kitchen. If they didn't have the kitchen, they couldn't do that. So again, we'd be small things, like some stuff that we do are very, very small, or things that be massive, but like you're saying, okay, but we're doing this because we've identified a need for it. Our local school had no indoor playing facility, right? They're playing outside in the rain and hard surface there and grass, and they're covered in mud when they come in. By upgrading our hall and putting basketball nets into the hall, we can give access to our national school to use the hall. So you're showing how you came up with and identify the need, okay? Or it could be just a basic thing, look, the roof is leaking, it's an obvious thing and we want to repair it. So it doesn't have to be, doesn't have to be all kind of like based on plans and research and all that. Just if it's fairly obvious, put it in what it is, but show there's a need for it, And again, the more people that benefit from that, again, if you do one thing, even though it might be a small thing for your centre, it's going to benefit a lot more people and give access to a lot more people. Financial details, again, what's the total cost for a project? So if you put in, say, 20,000 euros there, you have to show and prove that by showing the quotation. What's the grant amount you're seeking from the funds? So if you're seeking 100% funding, so if it's 25,000 euros, you put in 25,000 euros. If you're looking at 100,000 euro project and you got to put up with 5% matching, you're looking at 95,000 euros you're applying for. You can apply for less, obviously, and show more matching funds. That's only a minimum requirement. The more you show, probably the more chance you're going to have of getting funding. So you can say, look, the minimum requirement is 5%. We're actually able to show 20% matching funds. Our project cost 100,000. We're actually going to put up with 20,000 the matching funds. You know, you'll have a better chance then than the group that are looking for the maximum. Is your organization registered for VAT? Most organizations won't be. If your organization is not registered for VAT, typically they look for proof of that from revenue, which is literally a revenue letter that's sent out, or your accountant can state, no, the group aren't registered for VAT. The reason why they ask this question is if you're registered for VAT, you can claim the VAT back on the costs. So when let's say you get a quotation from a builder for 10,000 plus VAT, which would be 11,350, is it? You can claim that VAT back. So when you're applying for the grant, you can only apply for the amount net of VAT, right? So if it's 10,000 plus VAT on the quotation, you can only apply for the cost of 10,000, not the VAT amount. If you're not registered for VAT, you can apply for the whole amount because you're not claiming anything back, if that makes sense. Okay, so speak here. Now, I know most groups aren't registered for VAT. Some groups are though. So if you are registered for VAT, you can only put in the amount that's net of that on the application form. The budget then. So again, this is where you're adding your quotations, okay, and you're basically putting in a cost category. So category 1, and then you're putting the cost category type. So it might be building materials, equipment purchase, equipment rental, labor costs, fixtures and fittings. So there's a drop down list there you put in first. So let's say it's roofing costs, right? So you might say building materials and labor costs for registered tradespeople, okay? And you're given the breakdown of costs. You might put in there the breakdown of materials. So the cost of materials are 30,000 euros. The cost of labor is 15,000 euros. So just basically breaking it down. But the key thing there is that the totals here must match your quotations. It's an obvious one. Again, a lot of groups, they miscalculated. They calculated wrong. They added up wrong, and they put in a total here maybe 35,000 euros, and then the quotations are for like 28 or something like that. Okay, so just be careful. It sounds like a very common sense thing, and it is. But when you're rushing an application, this goes back to not being prepared. If you're rushing an application through, this is where you start making mistakes, and things don't start adding up. And the problem with that is that they'll say, okay, well, you asked for 25, but your quotation is only for 20. They're not going to come back looking for clarification from you. They just say, well, sorry, the application form is incorrect. So they're not going to, they might come back and look for clarification, but unlikely they will do. So again, you made a mistake in the application form, that stopped you from getting funding. So then the other parts in are like all applicants must now upload all the documentation. So this is where you go back to your file and where all your documentation is sourced. So planning permission if it's required, your lease, so period of at least 5 years. So if your lease doesn't have 5 years on it, you got a problem. Some groups are coming into their end of their lease and they're in the process of renewing. So they've only got maybe a year or 2 years left on their lease. That's a problem now. So you need to have that lease renewed before you apply. So again, that can cause issues. In some cases, there's no lease involved. You might be just given space for free, but there's no formal agreement in place with the owner of the building. Might be local authority giving a building for free, might be the local parish or the local diocese giving a building for free, might be a building owner given that's involved in a group giving a building for free, or space for free, or a site for free, or just use of a space for free. That's all fantastic, but there needs to be legal formal agreement in place. The reason for that, and this is why they look for it, some people get really annoyed why they look for this. If they give you a grant of 100,000 euros to do up a building that you don't own, and there's no formal lease agreement in place, that building owner could say, thanks very much. Thanks for giving us for upgrading our building to the value of 100,000 euros. Now you're out in your ear. Good luck. You know, we're no longer left in the building. That's why they look for a minimum period of the lease on it. Typically, it's 5 years because they reckon the value of the grant is gone within 5 years. It's depreciated after 5 years. There's no value in it anymore. Okay, that's why they look for. And sometimes, in some cases, some grants might be 25 years at least look for. So again, if it's only a formal or informal kind of agreement you have with them or verbal agreement you have with the owners, that won't do. It has to be formal agreement in place. You won't get that in time for the 14th of July if you don't have it. You might, but I'd be amazed if you do. So again, where there's a lease management rental agreement in place, right? So if you're renting a building from the owner of the building or landlord of the building, again, there must be permission in place. So typically with the lease on a building, you'd have a clause in there that you're allowed to do some upgrade works to the building with the permission of the landlord, right? So if you don't own the building, you can't just basically decide, I'm going to replace the roof without their permission. You have to get the permission in writing. So that's something you need to get. That's can be very straightforward if the person is local or if you know the person where it might be. But if you're dealing with, say, a diocese, right? So like a parish. So if the church own the building that you're on or the site you're on, then it's got to go through a whole legal process with them and their legal departments, and that can take time, right? So that's where you're going to get caught out there. Then that's normally the issue with a lot of these things. You might think it'll take a day or two and then go through a whole legal process, or the local authority legal department, that could take weeks. So again, you lose out on the deadline because of the fact you don't have things ready in place. Categories 2, so evidence planning. So again, this is category 2. So it's different things you need for categories. So if they ask for these things to be uploaded, don't ignore it, upload it, okay? If you don't have them and they look for them, you don't meet the criteria. So you need to be able to upload everything. You need to have it in place. You can't put in on anywhere here, you can't type in, we don't have them now, but we'll upload them afterwards. We send them on afterwards to you. That doesn't work with online applications. It doesn't work anyway, but it doesn't certainly work with online. If you don't have it now to upload it, you don't make the cut. And then so this is your terms and conditions. So basically, it asks you on most online applications, is there any information that is sensitive that you don't want them to disclose, right? So if, for example, you don't want them to disclose your annual accounts or disclose your, say, memos act association or whatever, or there's certain things you don't want to disclose, you just need to put in there that we'd rather you don't disclose our financial details, okay? To put in there. Tick this box, confirm you've agreed to the data protection statement, confirm you've read and agreed the application submission statement, review, so it'll ask you to review everything. So again, your organization details, they're basically just checking to make sure you reviewed everything before you send it in. Okay, so when you click on this, it allows you to go back and proofread and review each section. See where it says print here. So this is where you can print the application to save the application to review it later on and have it on file, okay? If they don't allow you to that, that's where you go back to the point, and Miriam made a point earlier, to do the application in the Word document where you can actually save the application in Word format, so you have a copy of it as a hard copy format. So then you hit submit. Never ever hit submit until you're really sure that it's ready to go. You've checked everything, checked it again, and checked it a third time, and that you're confident that everything is asked for has been submitted, and all the elements, all parts of the application form have been completed, and everything is accurate. Okay, really important to check that. When you hit submit, then normally it gives you kind of warning, are you sure you want to submit, typically, and when you hit submit, then it's gone. Then you get an email then to your email address that you submitted, saying that it's been successfully submitted. Okay, so that's the current application form that's out there for community centres. It's a good example to give because it's detailed. Most online applications will look for the same information. So the point I was making earlier on, if you print out this document or you save it as a Word document, the content of it, every application form you look at for that project going forward will have pretty much the same sections. They might be worded differently in terms of what they're asking you, in terms of what to complete, but if you go through, like, say if you picked 5 applications to look at, I guarantee you that 80% of the applications are looking for the same information. If it's for the same project, it's a matter of cutting and pasting. Okay, because you're not changing the details of it, like you're not changing your organization details, you're not changing your memos act association, you're not changing even the costs in some cases, right? What I would suggest though, in terms of the, if you have a generic application, just be careful that when you're applying for a different project, some of the information will be relevant, the organization details, all that will be relevant, but obviously the details of the project would be different. Some people have a habit of kind of going mad cutting and pasting, right? And they cut and paste into an application, but they forget to change some details of the project, and they're referencing maybe another project or something they did before. That's not going to cause confusion to the person assessing the application. They just know that you've basically you've included something that's not relevant to the application, therefore they would deem that application not relevant. Okay, and that happens a lot as well. So just be careful with it, that you are cutting and pasting. You can cut and paste an awful lot, but make sure that you're proofreading it to make sure that it's relevant to the project you're applying for now, especially on the cost side, because costs will change, obviously, and quotations will change for different projects. But like things like organizational structure and that shouldn't change. Any reference to national strategy or how it links in with national strategy or local strategy or policy, that won't change you, because national policy and local policy doesn't change regularly. It will change every number of years. So there's an example of your online application. As I said earlier, adding your documents is easy if you've everything filed in one location. It can be problematic if you don't have everything filed in one location. Give yourself plenty of time in getting ready for that. That's because that does slow things up a bit, where you're looking for documents you can't find. And it can be very, very frustrating because you're ready to go, but you don't have that one document that's needed. You can't find it. So leave nothing to the last minute. Have everything ready well in advance. Have the application form done well in advance of the deadline as well. And make sure you proofread it a couple of times and get someone else to proofread it as well. If you're writing an application, get someone else to read it as well to make sure it makes sense and it's accurate. Things like spelling mistakes, grammatical mistakes as well. It's not the English Leaving Cert we're doing here, but it is important that you are competent and show you some of the competency as well and professionalism. Okay, so that's the application form, and that brings to conclusion my presentation. Have you questions on? So Muriel's got her hand raised there. Yeah, Muriel. Yeah.
Sorry, just a question we get asked a lot, and I think it's only coming up lately. I mean, before you could just apply for all the grants, but is it getting more stricter now? Just say, for instance, a community centre gets 100,000 euro to do a major project on their community centre, and Pub will turn around in a couple of months' time and open up another grant for equipment for digital, something to do with digital isolation. Can they get the same fund from the same funders, or is that getting more streamlined and stricter?
But no, the companies look at it, and this is, I suppose, being kind of clever around it too. You can look for funding for a different project from the same funder and possibly under the same fund, right? So let's say that you apply for, let's say you apply for, say sports capital funding or the outdoor recreation scheme funding this year. Okay, let's say you apply for a playground under the outdoor recreation scheme funding this year, and next year you go in and say, okay, you want to apply to the outdoor recreation scheme again, and say, okay, well, now we want to put, we funded a playground, which is fantastic. With the playground finished, great stuff. We don't want to apply for a walking perimeter track around the playground. It's the same group applying to the same organization for the same fund, but for a different project. Or you can go back and say, well, last year, we needed 100,000 euros. We got 50,000 euros. We were able to phase one of the project. We're now going to do phase two of the project. Where you can't come in is you can't apply for the same thing twice, let's say, right? So you can't use the same quotations. It's the same project in a sense. So you can't just say, we've got funding here for, to say, office equipment, and now we're going back and looking for office equipment funds again, and we're using the same quotations and we're doing the same thing. It's got to be something different. Okay, now that's how some groups are fairly clever with this. The way they break the project down to phases allows them to do that, but also allows them to tap into different funds. So if you take, say, a sports club, traditionally sports club was not allowed to apply for leader funding. Okay, so you couldn't apply for leader grants, but either through accident or by design, they started including community facilities around their sports facilities. So every sports club put in, not every sports club, but a lot of sports club put in for leader funding to build a perimeter track around the pitch and to floodlight it, to allow a safe place for people to walk at nighttime in the village. Okay, the sports club applied for it, got the funding to do it, but of course it benefited the sports club as well, because you could also run this. It's also going to know about a running track for the players to train on. Okay, but the primary focus was to say, okay, we need it for the community. So they managed to get community grants because there was no community use, or they built a clubhouse with community meeting space. And now they got the clubhouse built because we're providing space for the community within that. So it's how you present it to them. But to answer your question, if if you're applying to the same organization under the same fund, it's got to be for either in addition to the existing project or a separate project.
Okay.
Okay, but that's why you say we're doing phase 1, phase 2. Okay, so the clubs would do it with sports capital every year. They would go back every year to apply for sports capital funding, but it's for phase 2 of a project, or last year was for the pitch, this year is for floodlights or whatever it might be. There is one thing with funding though, you got to be careful with this. There is a thing called de minimis funding, where you're allowed to basically draw down up to 200,000 euros in a 3-year period. So just be careful with that, because with leader funding, that will cause issues, because there is this EU law with de minimis funding. Now, there is categories under that which should basically exempt you from de minimis. So de minimis funding is basically, if it's to stop it's an anti-competitive type of ruling. So if, for example, you were an enterprise center and you were renting space to tenants, or you were a private business getting leader funding, you can only get so much grant support or state aid support within a 3-year period. Okay, but if you can show that we're not doing any commercial activity here, there's no fees being charged for this, we're not for profit, that will then exempt you from that de minimis category. But you need to check that with leader funding. They will ask you, does your project come under de minimis? No, it's hard for you to make that call on it. You need to discuss it with your local development company that's managing leader program to say, look, are we coming under de minimis here? We were involved in a project. We've a for-profit company to provide enterprise space, and we could apply for grant aid, but we reached our de minimis levels, so we can only apply for a certain amount of funding this year because we'd already received enough grant aid up to a certain point. So there is issues with that. So just be careful on that one. But in terms of going back to the same pot every year for funding, yes, you can go back as many times as you want to go back. Once it's not for the same thing that you come back for, it needs to be another element of it, or a continuation of it, or a phase of it, or for a separate project completely. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Yep.
Thanks, Tom.
Any other questions on that, or other questions in relation to grants or struggles you've had with grants in the past, or any applications? No.
They're all hungry now, I'd say.
Yeah. So did you find it useful this morning, the presentation in terms of the process and things? Okay. The key thing I would say to you, and before we wrap up, is, and Mary mentioned earlier on, in terms of hiring people to do this work for you, you don't need to. Okay, it's practice, and the area that most people fall down on when it comes to grants is organizational skills. They're just not organized. They don't have things ready, and it's all last minute. If you're organized and you have a good project, it's easy to explain a good project when you've got a good project. It's very difficult to explain a project where you're trying to make up a project just to get a grant. That's where you're going to get caught out. But it's really down to the technical stuff. The documentation is where most people fall down on. Just get that ready, get that put together now. If you're not applying for a grant, get that organized anyway. I will be sending you out the link. I'll send Muriel a link to the recording today. I'll also send out the PDF of the slides, which has the information on it, and the links to the various different websites I was talking about in terms of source information. If you've any questions at all that you have over today, or if you just want to bounce an idea off me, whatever it is, feel free to email me. There's no problem there whatsoever. We would have dealt with multiple projects over the years that, a simple email to us, we could email you back and say, this is what you need to look at or don't do. It'll save you a lot of issues. What I would also say to you as well is talk to other groups that are local to you or elsewhere that have got funding, and ask them what they did, how they did it, what were the problems with it. And don't, because like you're not competing with each other. You're not, don't try and reinvent the wheel. If a group up the country or down the country or wherever have done something similar to you, meet them and talk to them about how they got it funded, how they did it. That's what we do. We don't, we work on a project, we'll find a project elsewhere that did something similar, and we'll talk to them and say, look, how do you do this? How do you get it funded? What was your funding model? What were the obstacles? What were the issues with it? And they'll tell you, they're not going to not tell you. So again, just, while trying to put an application together and hope for the best, you should be going in fairly 90% confidence that you're going to have a good chance to get it. Okay, so unless any other questions, we'll wrap it up with that.
Thanks, Tom. It's great.
That's great. Great stuff. I'll send out a small survey as well for you to send out, just to get some feedback. Yep, as well. So if you can get some feedback on that, would be great. Fantastic. So best luck to you all with your grant applications and your funding on the line, and hopefully see you again soon. Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Excellent.
Thanks very
yeah.
much.
Thank you.
brilliant. Thanks
you.
very much.
Bye.
Bye
Bye.
bye.